Hello and welcome to this public meeting on understanding priorities for the use of digital health technologies to support clinical trials for drug development and review. We're very pleased that you all are joining us today. I'm Mark McClellan. I'm the director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy at Duke University, and I'm very pleased to be opening this important and timely meeting. Today's meeting addresses a PDUFA 7 commitment for the FDA to hold a series of 5 public meetings on advancing the use of digital health technologies. The FDA defined digital health technologies, or DHTs, as systems that use computing platforms, connectivity, software, sensors, for healthcare and related uses. Many DHTs are small portable instruments like watches that may be worn or used by trial participants and may allow for remote data acquisition in clinical investigations evaluating medical products. This meeting is going to have a special focus on the development and use of these portable instrument type DHTs to support clinical trials for drug development. DHTs represent an exciting, innovative, and emerging set of capabilities for integrating into clinical trials because they allow for measurement of a wide range of activities, behaviors, and functioning in real-life settings for a wide range of participants. Because of their remote data acquisition capabilities, they also have the potential to improve patient access to clinical trials over wide geographic areas, to increase patient population diversity in trials, and to promote retention in trials by reducing the burden involved in maintaining participation. Over the course of this 2-day meeting, we'll hear from a wide range of stakeholders, including patients, biopharmaceutical companies, DHT companies, clinicians, and academics, to understand the priorities and opportunities for the development of DHTs for use in clinical trials. We're going to have 5 sessions over these 2 days featuring presentations, panel remarks, and moderated discussion covering a wide range of topics, including presentations and discussions about the current landscape and perspectives on the inclusion of DHTs in clinical trials, including how the usage of DHTs may impact clinical trial accessibility and diversity, as well as more focused scientific sessions on actigraphy and some other sensor-based technologies, which are more mature, to delve more deeply into a few specific tools that may have a number of very near-term applications. Go to the next slide. Just a short note about our commitment to academic independence and avoiding taking partisan positions in our work. You can find more on our policies on our website. Just want to emphasize that we want a frank discussion of views today. Duke Margolis is convening this meeting in cooperation with the FDA. This is not a federal advisory committee meeting. While we're keenly interested in diverse input on this topic and all of your thoughts, we won't be following advisory committee procedures like taking a vote or seeking a formal consensus at the end of the meeting. This meeting will be a success if there's a broad exchange of key ideas and open discussion of them with the goal of advancing the field of DHT use. A recording of this meeting, as well as the meeting materials, is going to be available on the Duke Margolis event website and YouTube channel approximately a week after the conclusion of the event. I think we can take the slides down now, too. Throughout the workshop, I want to emphasize that we want all of you to share thoughts, submit comments and questions over Zoom. Our workshop team will review the questions and comments as they come in and route them to the session moderators and our other session participants so that the points or questions raised in the Zoom chat can be incorporated into the panel discussions. And for people who are joining us today, if you'd like to ask a question during the presentation and the open discussion portion of the meeting, please do type it into that Zoom Q&A box. We may have a high volume of comments since we have a very high volume of interested meeting participants. Again, we appreciate your joining us. We may not be able to get to all the questions, but we'll certainly make note of them in the records from this event. We are again very pleased that you all are able to join us today, and we anticipate productive discussion and moving this field forward. So to get us going, I'd like to turn to Dr. Jacqueline Corrigan-Karai, who's Principal Deputy and Principal Deputy Center Director for the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, to provide some opening contextual remarks from the FDA. Jacqueline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark, and it's really such a pleasure to be here and provide some of my thoughts about the importance of this meeting to FDA. You know, over the past several years, of course, there's just been growing interest in how do we leverage new sources of data to improve the efficiency, pace, and patient centricity of drug development. As you know, we already have a real-world evidence program that grew out of the fact that rich sources of clinical data were now available in electronic clinical care records. And with all the progress we've seen in moving to electronic systems of data capture, these records have provided new access to troves of data on trial participants, on their characteristics, on their outcomes, their treatments. But the use of modern information technology is not limited to healthcare records. It has allowed us to conduct study visits remotely using telemedicine procedures and to gather electronic informed consent from patients in their homes. These were such vital steps to keep trials going through the COVID pandemic. And as we move beyond COVID, these approaches will provide important opportunities to make trials more convenient for patients and to expand the types of data. For patients living far from clinical trial sites, for patients with other challenges or difficulties to get to a site, when you can reduce the burden and decentralize trial activities, it will make our trials more inclusive. The purpose of this meeting is to sort of extend our horizons and sources of electronic data into a completely new realm, the world of digital health technology. You know, many patients use digital health technologies every day. They use glucometers, they use blood pressure monitors, some of which can store and transmit data. We're increasingly seeing medical products that help patients track their medications and then can feed that information to the patient and their provider. And as we sit here in this meeting on our computer screens, almost all of us are carrying those powerful machines in our pockets or perhaps on our wrists that can be used to gather physiologic data. Our phones and smartwatches are monitoring our exercise, our heart rates, the rhythm, our sleep, and many other features that are maybe important when studying new medications because these are measures of how we function and feel. Besides smartphones and cell phones, a host of new portable or wearable technologies are being developed to monitor the health of patients, to record cardiac and respiratory function, to record movement and abnormal movements, and provide continuous monitoring and other analytics. And the range of the possible measurements continues to expand exponentially. As digital health technologies, these instruments offer powerful opportunities to improve clinical trials by expanding the clinical features we can measure, providing access to continuous data sources that were not available, and they represent how a person goes about their activities in the daily real world environment. And so it can also allow patients, therefore, to participate in trials because there is not the burden of repeated site visits to gather all of the information. Yet their use in clinical trials has been somewhat limited, and so we are really delighted to welcome you to this meeting to help us at FDA advance the use of digital health technologies in clinical trials. We believe they will have a significant impact on future drug development, clinical trials, and ultimately public health. And your contributions are vital to building a technological infrastructure to support this vision. So I really look forward to the presentations, to your questions and input. And with that I'll hand it back to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Jacqueline. And now we're going to go right into our first session. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Nancy Allen Lapointe, who's going to be our moderator for session one. Nancy Allen.
Great. Thank you, Mark. As said, my name is Nancy Allen Lapointe, and I'm a faculty fellow at the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy and an adjunct associate professor of medicine at Duke University. It's my pleasure to be here today to moderate this first session of the workshop. We have a great lineup of speakers and panelists for you today. These folks have both an extensive breadth and depth of knowledge and experience with DHTs. In this session, we'll be setting the stage for the workshop with a high-level overview of the use of DHTs in clinical trials for drugs, and more specifically, establishing some core definitions and laying out the scope and context for the meeting. The session will feature 3 presentations followed by a panel discussion. And as Mark mentioned earlier, for our audience members, please submit your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can during the panel discussion portion of this session. So with that, let's get started with the presentations. Our first presentation is from Dr. Leonard Sachs from the Food and Drug Administration. Leonard is an Associate Director of Clinical Methodology in the Office of Medical Policy at CDER. So Leonard, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Nancy Allen. So I just wanted again to welcome everybody to this very important meeting for us at FDA, and also to thank Duke Margolis for hosting the meeting. I'm going to give a quick overview of digital health technologies from the FDA perspective, and we can move on to the next slide. So I think we all recognize the profound impact that new technologies have on our ability to gather clinical data. We realize that computers that formerly occupied entire buildings are now condensed into our cell phones with extraordinary capacities for data storage and analysis. Digital health technologies provide opportunities to quantify clinical features more precisely and to transmit data from patients wherever they are. Next slide, please. What are DHTs? I'm not going to repeat the definition which Mark shared with us, but I'm going to emphasize that our focus today is on a subset of digital health technologies which are portable instruments that can be worn by patients or placed in their environments. And more specifically, we will be discussing those that involve the use of sensors to measure clinical features. Next slide. So what are DHTs? Well, broadly speaking, they begin with a transducer, and I invite any engineers on the program to correct me if I'm mistaken. They begin with a transducer of a physical phenomenon, for example, galvanometers, accelerometers, photoelectric sensors, electrochemical and thermocouples, to pick up things like charge, movement, light, etc. They have an output which is electrical. It's either voltage, current, or impedance, and they're used to measure a specific clinical feature, for example, heart rhythm, walking, scratching, sleep. And to do this, they make use of an algorithm. The transducer, together with the algorithm, form a DHT. And you can see in the last column on my table there, a mobile cardiac monitor, a Fitbit, a pulse oximeter that goes on the finger, a continuous glucose monitor, and an example of a digital thermometer. So these are digital health technologies that we're focusing on, these sorts of technologies today. Next slide, please. As far as biosensors go, they can measure many different clinical features, for example, steps, breaths, coughs, heartbeats, seizures, tremors, forced expiratory volume. And they can also give us continuous or frequent readings of glucose, of oxygen tension, temperature, electrocardiograms, and blood pressure. Next slide. DHTs, as we know, are already in widespread clinical use: continuous glucose monitors, ambulatory blood pressure monitors, and mobile cardiac monitors. And their clinical value is appreciated in making more comprehensive clinical assessments, and they allow us to monitor patients from their homes rather than clinic visits. Next slide. Clearly, these advantages can also be applied to clinical trials. Digital health technologies may allow us to modernize the performance of trials, to improve trial efficiencies. They allow us to make measurements in challenging populations, neonates, for example, and patients with dementia. They allow us to measure new clinical characteristics such as stamina, gait stability, and tremor. And they may provide more convenient and more precise ways to measure existing features, for example, things like sleep, exercise, and blood pressure. They may allow measurement of rare events, which were difficult to capture in site visits, for example, arrhythmias, seizures, and apneic spells. Next slide. Just a summary of some of the novel types of data that can be provided. They can give us richer data than in snapshots. For example, we can get something like the average count of steps per day instead of the 6-minute walk distance. We can get continuous glucose tracings instead of the static hemoglobin A1C. And as I mentioned before, we can detect rare events. We can get data from patients who cannot report. We can get dose response information over the period of dosing, for example, the on-off effects in Parkinson's disease. and we can make new types of measurements, which I mentioned before. Next slide. I'm not going to go into much detail, but this is a summary of the endpoints that were used in registrational trials between 2015 and 2020, prior to the pandemic. And the points I want to make are that among the 218 submissions, 30% relied on lab tests, things like chemistry, hemoglobin A1C, glucose, hematological tests, some microbiological tests, and so on. About 22% relied on imaging. A large percentage of these were trials for cancer, but they included other things like bone mineral density, vertebral factors. Physiological or functional measurements were the endpoints that were used in 7% of the applications. Things like the 6-minute walk distance, measurements of normal sinus rhythm, breathing, and sleep. Clinical events or clinical signs constituted about 22%, and clinician-reported outcomes or patient-reported outcomes formed the lion's share of these endpoints, 32% of all the applications, and they included familiar scales like, for example, the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale, rheumatology scales, and so on. Next slide, please. We realize that there are many different areas where digital health technologies may play a role in measuring endpoints. Clinical lab measurements, for example, continuous glucose monitoring, pulse oximetry, physiological measurements that I mentioned, heart rate and rhythm, breathing, lung function, seizures, syncope, temperature and weight, and performance assays, things like stamina, strength, coordination, abnormal movement, sleep, and cognition. Next slide, please. So why is the uptake of DHTs in trials lag behind? Well, we're in a world of uncharted territory. There's reluctance to move from tried and tested measures to those with potential advantages and potential risks and uncertainties. And this, of course, applies not only to regulators, but to industry as well. How do we recognize improvements on existing gold standards? And how do we recognize the disadvantages of our DHTs? Next slide, please. Scientific data are really the key to confidence in new measurements. How do new measurements stack up against existing benchmarks of drug activity? How robust are they in measuring known drug effects? What other approaches should we be taking to bolster our confidence in digital health technologies? Next slide. We're working to a common goal. FDA has a commitment to modernize clinical trials, incorporate technological and scientific advances, and potentially address the enormous costs and burden of drug development. There's a lot of interest from Congress, there's interest from industry and others in the community to enhance efficiencies in drug development. There are interests from new stakeholders like engineers and DHT manufacturers in supporting trials. And of course, most important, patients seeking more convenient ways to participate in the research enterprise. Next slide. We have a number of prescription drug user fee activities which we've committed to. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you can see highlighted in red, we're meant to be convening 5 public meetings, and this indeed is the first. I'm going to just review a couple of other activities that relate to DHTs in FDA. Next slide, please. We've developed a framework for the use of digital health technologies in drug and biological product development that's available on the web. Next slide. We've just recently published an updated draft of a guidance on electronic systems, electronic records and signatures in clinical investigations. Next slide, please. We have a newly established web page, DHTs for Drug Development, where we invite stakeholders to engage with FDA. Next slide. And we have a new method for tracking submissions that contain DHT data when they enter FDA's gateway. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit about a guidance which is relatively new and published December 2021 on digital health technologies for remote data acquisition clinical investigations. Next slide. Just a short overview of some of the content. Obviously, when using DHTs, one of the primary concerns is to make sure that we can rely on them for their measurements. So validation and verification are technological assessments, and these assess how well the technology measures the clinical feature of interest. By contrast, justification of an endpoint or a clinical outcome assessment is a clinical issue. It addresses how well the clinical feature of interest represents a meaningful response to treatment, and that in itself has nothing to do with the method of measurement. Next slide. When we think about endpoints, they're not simple. They're made of a number of components, including what is being measured, for example, steps, what is the time window of observation, and what is the formula for the response in each patient, for example, the change from week 1 to week 4 in average daily step count. Next slide, please. Our guidance also references the importance of ensuring suitability of DHTs for use in the trial, whether they're ugly or elegant, easy to put on and operate, comfortable to wear, whether the battery life and syncing requirements are suitable, and whether you can bring your own device. Next slide. Besides endpoints, there are many other uses for DHTs. They can be used for enrollment and screening. They can be used for enrichment of trial populations. They may help us to quantify disease severity or functional status at enrollment. They can help us with safety monitoring, identification of rare adverse events, and real-time access to safety data. They can provide information on the dose effect. We can visualize responses over a dose interval, and endpoints, as I've already mentioned. Next slide, please. So moving to actigraphy, this is an accelerometer. Accelerometers are small electronic devices that can be used to track movement. Next slide, please. We're really using these transducers in our cell phones and so on. We're really generally not aware of how much exercise we do, how much we sleep or sit, which is one of the reasons that actigraphy applications are so popular. These data may be equally informative for clinical trials in a number of neuromuscular diseases, cardiorespiratory and rheumatologic diseases, where we rely on assessments of patient functionality. For some of these diseases, such as heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, and muscular dystrophy, we've relied on the 6-minute walk distance to measure the effects of treatment. But I think, as many in the audience will recognize, this is a clumsy test, confounded by things like performance anxiety, levels of enthusiasm, pain or discomfort, to name a few. Next slide, please. So actigraphy offers many potential advantages over the 6-minute walk distance. It provides data over longer periods of time rather than just at study visits. It allows data to be obtained from patients in their homes, performing activities of daily living without need to travel to clinical trial sites. And it seems to be a more natural way to measure functionality. Actigraphy may also be tailored to measure other specific activities, such as tremor, scratching, or coughing, as we'll hear about. Accelerometers are in widespread use in cell phones, smartwatches, and a plethora of wellness and fitness devices, so the technology is already fairly well understood. And for these reasons, actigraphy is the technology that has received the most attention from industry and from regulators. And we have an entire session on actigraphy, hoping to address the challenges and to identify opportunities in order to support the use of actigraphy in clinical trials. Next slide. Actigraphy is clearly not the only technology of interest. Medical devices may also play a significant role in evaluating the effects of treatment. Continuous glucose monitoring, as we've heard from previous speakers, has a major impact on clinical management of diabetes. Small wearable sampling devices allow easy access to glucose levels as they change through the course of the day. And the value of these is probably underutilized in clinical research. Small wearable monitors that can measure cardiac rate and rhythm, record ECGs, measure blood oxygen saturation, and more are widely available. And we look forward to hearing how these may play a role in clinical trials. And another promising area involves sensors that are not worn, but are placed in the patient's environment. And these are versatile in measuring patient movement, activities, and many physiological or pathological events. And they may also simplify the demand on patients that wearable devices present. Next slide. And the list goes on. Microphones that analyze voice prints, and cameras for visible lesions, electrodes to monitor muscles, nerves, and brains, and undoubtedly plenty that we have not thought about. Next slide. Now, of course, most importantly, patients. A fundamental consideration regarding digital health technologies is the people who will use them. On the one hand, DHTs offer opportunities to gather data from patients wherever they are. This may appeal to patients who have difficulty traveling to clinical sites, such as those with socioeconomic challenges, and this promises to make trials more inclusive, as we heard earlier. On the other hand, there are individuals who are unable or unwilling to use electronic technology. How do we strike the right balance to make trials more inclusive? Could the use of DHTs provide bias data? For example, sicker patients not using their DHTs, resulting in a selective loss of data on poor outcomes. Perhaps a neglected but foundational question is whether patients believe that digital health technologies reflect their experience. And our session on diversity and inclusion will address this. Next slide, please. So just to reinforce our ultimate public health goals, we shouldn't lose sight of our patients and of the diseases we're trying to treat. We are focused on getting more drugs for areas of medical need and of better characterization of drug effects in clinical trials. And my last slide summarizes some of the aims of the meeting. So I think, firstly, our intention is to understand the landscape of available technologies and their uses. And we focus on actigraphy and other sensors to identify areas of opportunity, new technologies for measurement, diseases that can be studied in new ways. We want to identify ways to gain confidence in the use of digital health technologies for drug development, to identify gaps, both scientific gaps and regulatory gaps, to support the use of these technologies. And we want to identify usability issues that may either promote or discourage engagement of diverse populations. So I'll end there again with a welcome to everybody and just to voice my enthusiasm for this meeting and very much looking forward to the scientific discussion. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Leonard. We've had a lot of questions coming in already, so we're pleased with that. Please keep them coming in. I think Leonard gave a great overview of what we're going to be talking about today and what the interests are from our stakeholders with regards to DHT. So like I said, keep the questions coming. Our next presentation is from Dr. Matt Diamond from the Food and Drug Administration. Matt is the Chief Medical Officer for the Digital Health Center for Excellence. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. My name is Matt Diamond, and I serve as the Chief Medical Officer at FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence, based at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And I'm very pleased that we're holding this workshop today focused on the use of digital health technologies in drug development. I'm going to focus today on describing what we've been doing to support the use of DHTs in clinical trials so that we can enable the next generation of clinical trials and ultimately of medical therapies that the trials are evaluating. Next slide, please. And I'd like to begin by highlighting that all of our work is really about patients. Patients are at the heart of what we do, and our vision at the Device Center, or CDRH, is that patients in the US have access to high quality, safe, and effective medical devices of public health importance, first in the world. Next slide. At CDRH's Digital Health Center of Excellence, we're focused on digital health technologies, and we're advancing healthcare by fostering responsible and high quality digital health innovation. As you've already heard today, digital health technologies perform an increasingly important role in healthcare in many different ways, and you can see some examples depicted here on this slide. So from left to right, DHTs are measuring and guiding people's behaviors. They're analyzing medical images to aid in diagnosis. They're helping to manage diseases like diabetes. They're monitoring conditions like arrhythmias, and they're enabling patients to more easily report their experience. And these examples are focused on the provision of healthcare. But all of these DHTs can also serve an important role in clinical investigations of other products, which is the focus of our workshop today. So for example, DHTs that analyze images or that measure behaviors can play an important role in helping to monitor disease progression in patients undergoing drug treatment. We also would like to underscore, as has been mentioned already today, that digital health technologies are essential for bringing high quality healthcare to really underserved populations, to a broader community, to help move healthcare into the home setting. And the same is true for clinical trials. DHTs can serve an important role in increasing access to trials and improving the diversity of participation in trials. Next slide. In other words, digital health technologies can transform how we study medical products. And that includes enabling remote data collection and decentralized clinical trials, facilitating new and innovative clinical investigative endpoints, improving access to clinical investigations, as we've said, and capturing real-world data and patient-generated health data. Now, what we've gathered here today to discuss in this first of a series of FDA public workshops, as has been mentioned, is what are our priorities for the use of DHTs to support clinical trials for drug development and review. And what I'd like to share are some of our priorities at the Digital Health Center of Excellence for supporting the use of DHTs in clinical trials. Next slide. So I've listed 4 priorities here, and I'll go through them from left to right. First, it's a priority for us to promote a patient-centered approach with a focus on health equity. Health equity is a really important strategic priority, not only for us here at FDA, across the whole government in the broader community, and that is a foundational priority for us. Second, we're working to ensure that technologies are fit for purpose for specific clinical applications. Third, we're aiming here to provide as much regulatory clarity and predictability as is possible. And fourth, we're working to support a least burdensome approach so that there aren't unnecessary barriers for the integration of digital health technologies, not only into healthcare, but also into clinical trials. So as I go through some of this information, I hope that it can also serve as an invitation for your continued collaboration on all these areas so that we can advance this field together. Let's go ahead and start with the first priority. And if you could go on to the next slide, please. Promoting a patient-centered approach with a focus on health equity. We foster digital health collaborations that advance public health, and I've listed some of them here. I'll go through it briefly from the left to right. We have our Centers for Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation, our CERCEs. We participate in numerous collaborative communities, public-private partnerships. We have a network of digital health experts, and we also have a digital health inbox that you'll hear more about in a moment. So how else are we promoting a patient-centered approach? If you can go on to the next slide. We convene a Patient Engagement Advisory Committee, or PEAC, meeting to elicit input specific on emerging topics. And I've listed some of the recent topics here, and you'll see that really many of them are about digital health technologies, whether that's artificial intelligence and machine learning, cybersecurity, augmented reality and virtual reality, clinical trials, the use of e-platforms. This is a really important way that we get input directly from patients, and we hope that it can also, in addition to providing us really important information at FDA, it can serve as an example for providing patient input into the development of all of the medical products, across the spectrum of devices, drugs, as well as biologics. Next slide. We also issue guidance. And many of these guidances are around promoting diversity in clinical trials. You see some of them listed here focused on race and ethnicity, how to evaluate sex-specific data in medical device clinical studies, age and race, ethnicity data, how to, again, evaluate and report that in medical device clinical studies. And we are, always working on new guidance to continue to provide information to help guide the community in promoting a patient-centered approach and one that advances health equity. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on our second priority, which is ensuring that technologies are fit for purpose for clinical investigations. And when I say fit for purpose, I'm specifically talking about the conclusion that the level of validation associated with digital health technology is sufficient to support its proposed use in a clinical investigation. And I've listed here some questions that I think are important in this determination. This is not a complete list, but it's always important to consider what is the specific clinical event or characteristic of interest, and is it meaningful? Can the digital health technology reliably measure that clinical event or characteristic? What is the population of interest? And what are some other considerations for the digital health technology? Leonard mentioned some of them. For example, is it really wearable? Does a DHT need to be charged? What are any pain points for users in incorporating that technology into their lifestyle? Next slide. We've been working as well to promote global harmonization of best practices, and I've listed here a set of guiding principles that we developed in collaboration with regulatory partners at the UK and also in Canada. This is focused on the subset of digital health technologies that are enabled by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And although these principles are intended for medical device development, we feel that many of them are broadly applicable as best practices for using artificial intelligence and machine learning. We want to acknowledge that we feel that many of the DHTs that have significant promise for use in clinical trials are and will be in the future enabled by machine learning. Next slide. I also want to highlight, we recognize that this is really very much an emerging field and an emerging science. At FDA, we perform and support leading regulatory science research, and I'm highlighting here a recent report, a spotlight on digital health regulatory science research opportunities. This is a really important area for us, and we really welcome continued collaboration in this area. I think we'll move on to the next priority area, providing regulatory clarity and predictability. And this is one of our focus areas. We encourage you to engage with the agency early and often. There are many mechanisms. I've listed some of them here. There are numerous medical product development tool programs, both on the medical device and on the drug side. We participate in numerous public-private partnerships. And then the Digital Health Center of Excellence is a resource for digital health technologies in numerous ways. And I want to remind you, it's really important to engage early again with the center responsible for the medical product being studied to discuss the use of a DHT in a particular investigation. And so for the sake of drugs, that is CEDAR. For those that are developing tools that can be used, for example, for both drug development and medical device development, it's also important to engage with the review division at the device center that is responsible for reviewing those devices. And we are available at the Digital Health Center of Excellence to provide input on DHTs across applications broadly. Next slide. Just highlighting again here that if you have questions about the regulatory status of a digital health technology, you can always come and speak to us. We have a lot of information on our website at the Digital Health Center of Excellence, and we have an email address that you can reach out to us. That's digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov, where we can provide a response usually within a week or two. It's significantly faster than some of the more formal regulatory processes. Sometimes we can point you to a particular guidance that can be helpful in understanding how your DHT or your study is similar to or different than others that we've seen in the past. And folks have found it helpful. So I would encourage you to use that as a resource. Next slide. And a very important way that we provide regulatory clarity and predictability is through our guidance. I've listed some of them here. And this goes beyond the use of digital technologies in clinical investigations, but some of them are focused on specific types of digital technologies. For example, clinical decision support software, which can play a really important role in drug trials. And so there's a lot of specific information about specific device types and types of DHTs, and all this information is available on the FDA website. Next slide. So all of our guidances, as you may know, we first put them out in draft for your feedback. And so I wanted to take this moment to really acknowledge that we welcome and we appreciate all of your feedback. Leonard mentioned the guidance on digital health technologies for remote data acquisition in clinical investigations. We received hundreds of comments on this guidance, and we're working together to analyze all that feedback. Your input really does make a difference, and it's very much appreciated. Next slide. So the last focus area, I think, goes hand in hand with providing regulatory clarity and predictability, is our devotion to supporting a least burdensome approach. Now, we acknowledge that some DHTs meet the definition of a medical device, others do not, and many of our guidances go into great detail about figuring out what is the regulatory status of a product. We encourage the use of both device and non-device DHTs in clinical investigations. And I'd like to provide a few quick answers to some commonly asked questions that we get a lot at FDA. Next slide. That I think are very relevant for this topic area. The first is whether pre-market clearance or approval is required to use a device in a clinical investigation. And the answer essentially is that if you have a device that is intended only for use in clinical investigations, these are typically exempt from many of the requirements applicable to devices. And that includes pre-market clearance or approval, as long as the investigation complies with applicable requirements of the IDE regulations, and that's 21 CFR 812. Now, of course, other good clinical practice regulations apply, including those related to IRBs and the protection of human subjects. But we wanted to highlight that the IDE regulations are set up to not only protect human subjects, but to remove barriers for using devices in new ways in clinical investigations. Next slide. And a related question that we often get is, when is an investigational device exemption application to FDA required? And the answer is that if you have a DHT that is a device that you intend to use in a clinical investigation, there are a number of different scenarios. It could be a non-significant risk device, and in that case, an IDE application to FDA is generally not required. It could be a significant risk device, and if you're using it for a drug trial, when all the information required in an IDE application is also contained in an IND, FDA generally does not expect sponsors to submit a separate IDE for those clinical investigations. And lastly, for a device used in accordance with its authorized intended use, an IDE application to FDA is generally not required. So I hope that this information is helpful and also reflects our least burdensome approach at FDA. Next slide. So just to summarize, I wanted to provide an overview of how we're working to support the use of digital health technologies to encourage their use in clinical trials, how we're promoting a patient-centered approach with a focus on health equity, how we're working to ensure that technologies are fit for purpose. We work to provide regulatory clarity and predictability and to support a least burdensome approach. We're really very pleased to be here, and we're very glad that you're here as well. And we look forward to continued collaboration with you and to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, for that wonderful overview of the Digital Health Center for Excellence and the work here. It's wonderful. Our final presentation for this session is going to be from Lucy Sesnikova. Lucy is a program lead at the Digital Medicine Society. So Lucy, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here together with such great presenters. Thanks, Leonard and Matthew, for your presentations. And I would like to continue with the role that DHTs play in advancing drug development. I would like to look at where we are right now, what value they already bring to clinical investigations, what is the status quo right now, and what are some of the challenges that we are still seeing in use of DHT. So this is going to be more of a high level rather than some specific cases, but I will try to sprinkle that here and there. So next, please. So at DIME, Digital Medicine Society, we are a global nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the ethical, effective, equitable, and safe use of digital medicine tools to redefine healthcare and improve lives. Next, please. We launched in 2019, which is almost already more than 4 years ago. Next, please. And we sit at the intersection of two communities. So the healthcare, clinical community, and the technology community. At DIME, we are trying to bring these together as a collaborative community that shares ideas, projects, works together to advance how digital tools are used in medicine and healthcare. Next, please. So today we are here to talk about clinical trials, and we know that clinical trials right now are long, they are very expensive, they face a lot of recruitment challenges. For example, 1 in 5 trials is terminated without meeting the goals for recruitment. They have low rates of technical success, so we know that the probability of bringing the molecule from start to the market is very low, and they also face a lot of equity and access challenges, and there are still populations that are very and repeatedly underrepresented in clinical trials. So today, talking about digital health technologies, we might think that are they the silver bullet that will help address all of these challenges that clinical trials have? And of course, we know that there is no such thing as a silver bullet for anything. So I'd like to talk a bit about where we stand now, how we are capturing the value that DHTs offer for clinical trials, and what are still some challenges that they have. Next, please. So at DIME, we crowdsourced a library of digital endpoints, and we looked at how many endpoints, what they are, and where they were used. We found out that over 100 sponsors have collected digital endpoints in their trials already. This has been updated as of January 2023, so this is pretty recent data. Next, please. And we found that these digital endpoints are being collected in all phases of development, whether it is a drug, device, or biologics or clinical trials. 68% of these are from phase 2 and phase 3, so which are these bigger pivotal trials. We saw them mostly for drug trials, but also device trials, a little bit less so for biologics, other and genetic. And we saw that a lot of them were secondary endpoints or even primary endpoints, and even supporting label claims. Let's go next, please. So based on the presentations from Leonard and Matthew, we know that FDA has launched new draft guidance in December 2021 about digital health technologies for remote data acquisition in clinical investigations. And they are being very great to launch more and more guidances and directions about how to take these devices, these technologies, and use them in clinical trials meaningfully. Next, please. Similar things are happening also in Europe. EMA also issued a guidance, some questions and answers, and also opinion on SV95C, so stride velocity 95th centile as a secondary endpoint for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which has been used for acquiring data about this from these trials with the use of digital technologies. So we can see that the work is happening, and the digital health technologies are being used as an endpoint in clinical trials. Can we go next, please? And we found, when we look at the endpoints positioning, that there are 378 unique endpoints that were reported, and these were the data collected from clinicaltrials.gov, so registered trials. But when we think about it, is there really 378 unique things to measure? Can we go next, please? It appears that we are probably competing more on what to measure as opposed to doing some good patient-focused drug development and measuring the most important aspects of someone's lives. When you recall Leonard's slides, there really are not that many examples what is measurable in terms of events and longitudinal data or the outputs that we are getting from the sensors. So why do we have 400 different ways how to look at these very few concepts. Next, please. At DIME, we are trying to do the work to identify the most important things that to the patients and how they should be measured. There is this measures that matter framework that guides us when elucidating what is really meaningful to the patients, what are the concepts connecting to these meaningful aspects to the patients, and how these should be incorporated to outcomes and endpoints measurable by DHTs. If we take an example, for example, measuring sleep, we can measure how many hours person sleeps, how many hours they spend in delta, how many times they wake up or even get up from bed, how much they toss around, they sleep, etc. But if we look into what is really important to patients, we may find out that they probably want to feel rested in the morning and be in a good condition to tackle their daily tasks. So we should then look for those concepts and those measurable items that really are directly connected to these meaningful aspects of life for patients. This way, the sponsors and researchers will be sure that they are measuring what matters, and a nice side effect of this is that we will have actually less measures, but they will be more unified, they will be used by everyone in the same way. This brings an opportunity to share the data, collaborate, cross-compare different researches, take the same measurement into different subpopulations, etc. So using this framework is important to identify what matters to the patients and make sure that we are measuring the same things in the same way connected to these meaningful aspects. Next, please. So at DIME, we are tackling this work in several projects focused on digital measurements. Our first one was digital measurement of nocturnal scratch for atopic dermatitis that has come to a successful end. We worked with industry partners, but also partners from patient organizations, academia, researchers or clinicians, and we brought them together to tackle several aspects that the measurement of nocturnal scratch should have to be really meaningful to the patients. So if we go next, please. So in this work, we did patient research, which goes back to the framework I was talking about. We collected evidence from mixed method study from the patients to really identify what those important things are to them when they're suffering from atopic dermatitis. We looked at measured terminology and ontology. So what are the values? What are the things about nocturnal scratching that we should be measuring? We tackled also the operational side of things. So we brought together some tools supporting successful operational implementation in clinical trials. And we also talked to payers and explore how they would be prone to accept these new measures in their decisions in the future. So all of this work is now publicly available. You can head over to our website and look at what came out of this work. And what is really great that we see is that this really generated not only the interest, but also a lot of collaboration between sponsors, between researchers, and these different players in the ecosystem that are now viewing the problem a little bit more intensely and a little bit more in a structured and unified way. Let's go next, please. A similar project now underway is for Alzheimer's disease. We are looking into what are the things most important to patients with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias that should be in the focus of digital health technologies for measurement. Next, please. Same thing for physical activity. This one is very interesting because in the physical activity, there are many different ways how you can define whether you are active. It can be steps, it can be METs, it can be minutes of activity. So what are the aspects and the concepts that really are unified across therapeutic areas and should be in the focus on digital health technologies, measuring them? Next, please. And last but not least, in this area is going on in the measurement of sleep. Next, please. So when we look back now, and this is a slide from the playbook, another great resource from DIME, identified value in using digital clinical measures in trials is a lot of in risk and cost reduction, mostly for pivotal trials or screening and enrichment. But why are we seeing such white spaces in, for example, natural history research or post-marketing studies? Does this mean that the value to use digital health technologies is not there? Well, yes, but in these cases, the return of investment is not only bringing the new drug to market and make money, but it is also a return of investment in form of knowledge about the disease, its phenotypes, patient subpopulation, long-term effects, etc. This value can be utilized by not only the industry, the sponsors, but also researchers, healthcare providers, and patients themselves. And we need to think more broadly about the value to drive return of investment, not only in monetary terms, but also in terms of knowledge and patient-centric findings. So this is one of the challenges of digital health technologies, to realize that the value lies also in the acquired knowledge that we can add to the understanding of the disease, the patients, the subpopulation, the phenotypes, and not only about specific drug or treatment. Even that is often, of course, the main focus of the trial. Next, please. So what can we do to maximize the value that is offered, right? So the value cannot be captured if we work in silos. The technology developers and sponsors do want to bring the DHTs to trials, but they need to work with the whole ecosystem to make it successful. Patients and clinicians, of course, are central to adoption because they will be the ones actually having the technologies in their hands and using them. So there should be some really good design and development, and I will talk about that a little bit later on. But there are also regulators, payers, academics, and professional societies to help drive the adoption with their specific angles of focus, the regulations, the guidances, etc. In the end, everyone has their role to play in adoption and capturing the value of digital technologies for clinical research and healthcare, and this should be kept in the forefront of the mind when thinking about development and deployment of DHTs in trials. Next, please. Another important topic is how DHTs in clinical trials impact diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know now that equity in clinical trials is currently not great, and little about what we know about drugs on the market is about the full population. The access to clinical trials is quite inequitable, and many, for example, many rare diseases aren't targeted because the density of individuals is too low and still depending on trial site. So we are often asking, will DHTs make equity worse because not everyone has access to these technologies? But that is already probably the wrong question because the equity is already bad. The right question to ask is, how can we use DHTs and the digitization of clinical trials to improve equity, and then do the work to address the long-standing disparities? Next, please. A nice example are decentralized clinical trials that can leverage something as simple as a text message to reach underrepresented population that may not have good access to sites or other resources. Now, most of the people own a mobile phone. It doesn't always need to be the newest iPhone, even though that's what the researchers and the tech developers like the most, right? But such a simple thing as a text message can unlock the access to clinical trials to population that otherwise would not have it. So these are the decentralized trials that don't always need to rely on the site, and digital health technologies can reach the populations that could be geographically further from the site or cannot afford to travel to sites, etc. So this is one of the examples how DHTs can improve the equity and access to clinical trials. Next, please. To help answer questions around equity and inclusion, DIME and DataCC collaborative community have put together a great set of resources to support inclusive development of DHT solutions. So all of the questions that you should ask yourself when you are creating or intending to use a DHT, digital health technology, in your trial. Next, please. And the next one following that is a toolkit that will help you ensure that when your technology is deployed to clinical trials, all members of the community benefit. Next, please. So with these tools, the organizations can make person-centered decisions in their process that will increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials with the use of DHTs. I strongly urge you to read through these resources. There are really great links, case studies, examples that will help you in your specific use case when you are thinking about digital health technology in clinical trials. Next, please. So last but not least, of the things that are important to meaningfully introduce DHTs into clinical trials is education of oneself, but also workforce in companies about fundamentals of digital medicine. Next. And also about ethics in digital health. And this is a topic important to everyone. And with Dime Academy, we are making sure that this kind of education is available to the professionals and the communities who will be working with DHTs in clinical trials. So we want to support not only collaboration, but also education and also meaningful incorporation of thoughts and designs around inclusion and equity in clinical trials that are leveraging digital health technologies. For some finishing notes to my presentation, digital technologies are here to stay and evolve, and clinical trials should and need to evolve with them. We need to make sure to capture the value they offer and maximize their potential via collaboration within the ecosystem, making sure that the decisions are inclusive and equitable, and patients are always in the center of our focus. This can be done via education, sharing, and collaborating between all of the members of the ecosystem. Next, please. I would like to finish my presentation with an actual finding from our research with patients from the Nocturnal Scratch project, where we asked them in interviews what they want, like why would they scratch less at nighttime. And we found that it is not only about scratching, but it is about fixing the whole disease, not just symptoms. They want to improve the look of skin. They want to sleep better, not having the urge. They want to have less side effects of treatments or improve quality of life. So in this example, you can see that in such a simple thing as scratching at night, it means a whole lot to the patient. It means a whole universe of reasons why they want to get rid of their disease. And this is something that we can address and capture with digital technologies when used meaningfully in clinical trials. So with this specific example, I would like to say goodbye and thank you for your attention. And I hope that this conversation is going to be valuable for everyone in the audience.
Great, thank you so much, Lucy, and not goodbye just yet. So, thank you all for your presentations. We're going to ask all the panelists and presenters to come back on camera, and we're going to move kind of into the discussion phase here. But first off, we are going to add 2 additional panelists, and we're going to give them the opportunity to give a couple of minutes of remarks to sort of kick off our discussion section here. So first up is Dr. Carrie Northcutt, who is a Senior Director and Project Lead with Digital Sciences and Translational Imaging at Pfizer. So Carrie, can you please share some of your thoughts and perspectives with us?
So first of all, thank you for having me as be part of this panel. It's been a phenomenal kickoff to this great set of talks, and you set up the conversations well. I'm tremendously excited about where we're at with DHTs and these novel digital endpoint development that's ongoing. It's exciting times. We're creating new tools for the toolbox, new novel quantitative longitudinal endpoints that can be utilized to more fully understand diseases that are taking place, help in clinical trials, and really ultimately help in the drug development, improving patients' lives as well as their overall quality of life as well. It provides, not only does it create novel digital endpoints, we're taking traditional endpoints and now being able to take single point in time measurements and measuring longitudinally over time, really getting that true picture of how that endpoint changes over time with treatment and the disease state itself. All of these are great advantages as we move forward. Within DSTI and Pfizer, we're truly engaged in developing, validating, and trying to operationalize these endpoints into our clinical trials using digital health technologies. We do realize there are, as with every road, some potholes and winds in the road as we go through, more fully understanding how to validate these endpoints, understanding how to qualify the technologies, trying to compare to gold standards to things that don't really have gold standards. We're running across some of these various challenges as we go through, as well as paying attention at all times to the patient, the healthcare provider, And ultimately, always starting with the question that we want to answer. We just don't add digital health technologies to add them. We want to make sure we approach everything with a question or a hypothesis, and then find the best way to take those measures, make sure they're validated, that the data is secure, that we can analyze and understand that data, be able to present that to regulators and utilize those in our trials, and ultimately help patients. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to this panel.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie. And then next, we have Cindy Gagan, who is a patient advocate, advisor, and activist. Cindy, you want to share some of your thoughts and perspective with us?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm going to bring my patient perspective of being a breast cancer survivor of almost 30 years and subsequently becoming a patient advocate, educating, informing, and advocating for patients, as well as my work that I've done through CITI, which is another FDA Duke collaboration, public-private partnership, as well as serving on the research committee for DIME. So while I recognize that a lot of this is going to be covered, and there's no question about the opportunities that digital health technologies will bring to clinical research, I think it was mentioned that technology can't solve for all the barriers to clinical trial participation. I think it's between like 3 and 5% of eligible patients participate in trials, and technology isn't going to solve for all of that. It will help with access. Some of the work we did at CITI, most of we included some patient surveys as well as interviews, and almost a large majority of patients said they would participate in a trial using the technology, and mostly because of the convenience, like not losing work, not losing time, and not having to travel. But some of the other biases that come in, and they may be addressed in subsequent panels, is patients' number one reason for not participating is because they were never asked. They're not informed of trials. And in some cases, people believe that it's because they're viewed as not being eligible or to kind of take on the additional responsibility. So will digital health technologies increase that bias? There's also a shifted burden. Like some of these burdens of travel and time are being eliminated, but there's also added burdens of like managing the technology, charging it, making sure it's functioning. The flexibility, Leonard mentioned, what is the device elegant? Well, one of the things we learned in our CITI work was that people didn't even want it noticeable if they had to go out in public, or if they had a job where wearing a wrist wearable or a ring, or even something that's even more noticeable that would show to people that they had a health condition. The other thing to think about, and this may come up, and these aren't all solvable, but there's things to think about at the patient level, is as people bring their consumer expectations for wearables to their participation in clinical trials. So they're looking for 24/7 support. Is this thing working? If it doesn't work, who am I going to call? And it comes with self-tracking. So they're used to self-tracking and seeing their data. I think over 90% of the people we talked to wanted to see their data in real time. And so there's a lot of education that needs to be going through, as well as informing the reasons for not being able to share data. And that can all come in that informed consent. So I look forward to this discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Cindy. So I mean, it's really amazing what I've heard here today is just this area is developing so fast and furious, right? So we have so much technology coming out. We've had and so many of us now have technologies that we use in our everyday life, that we use even in clinical care, and now sort of taking that and looking at how do we use these digital health technologies in clinical trials for drugs is sort of a natural sort of next step or next way to think about this. So I guess trying to keep the focus on thinking about DHTs, use of DHTs in clinical trials for drugs, because otherwise we get really out into a big spectrum of things. One of the first questions I actually want to ask is a thing looking back. So one of our audience members sent in a question. I thought it's kind of an interesting question. I think it's kind of a hard one. But it was basically trying to differentiate, or asking to differentiate a digital from a traditional endpoint. And what they went on, and they kind of addressing this to the FDA, but I really think this is for everybody on the panel, I think, is to describe the difference between legacy digital methods we've been using increasingly for decades, and they talk about EEGs, EMGs, functional studies, computer-based cognitive testing, for example, and those that are exactly the same but rely on smartphones or small ambulatory devices to digitize the data. So is there a difference there? What is where are we going there? I'll open it up to anyone.
You know, I can start and would welcome others' thoughts as well. And I think it's a good question. And, you know, what we're seeing is you take a category of product or of technology like digital health technologies, and the definition that we use is very broad, right? I think Leonard showed it, a system that uses computing platforms, connectivity, software, and sensors for healthcare and related uses. And we live in an increasingly connected world. And, you know, much of our non-medical world is enabled by this connectivity and the availability of computers. And so, you know, when we think about the difference between the type of measure that I think we're looking to encourage in clinical trials, you know, through all these initiatives, as opposed to a traditional measure, it might be most helpful to use an example. And I'll take polysomnography as one, you know, which uses a whole host of measurements, including EEG and ECG and breathing. But the field has not evolved very much in the last 50 years, right? The sleep study that was done last century is not all that different than one that was that is done today. And while the measurements may be digitized today, they haven't seen the type of advances that can come from being able to use a small, portable, wearable or environmental product that incorporates sensors in a patient's home, that allows a person to monitor their sleep in their own beds, unencumbered by you know, having to wear all of these EEG and other electrodes that are traditionally very disruptive for sleep, to be able to measure this longitudinally over time, so that it's not just 1 or 2 nights, again, in an artificial environment. I hope that this can help express where we would like to see the field going. But in order for us to get there, we need to demonstrate that the digital health technologies that provide that home monitoring for sleep, or the particular ones that may be intended for a clinical investigation, are reliable, that they measure the things that the aspects of sleep that we're most interested in, and that they're fit for purpose for the particular question being asked by the study and for the population that is the focus of the study. And I'll just pause there and let others share as well.
Great. Leonard, it looks like you came off microphone. What would you like to share?
Sure, I had a couple of comments. I mean, from my perspective, there aren't digital endpoints. They're digital measurements of clinical endpoints. And I think we're measuring people. We're not measuring digital phenomena. So whether you use a digital thermometer or mercury thermometer, it doesn't matter. What's important is whether the patient has a temperature or not, whether they're febrile. And the same would apply to all these other measurements that we're using. We're really looking at clinical features. So I think in terms of what the endpoints are, whether they're used as endpoints in trials or enrichment strategies, these are clinical things that haven't really changed. We may be able to measure new clinical features, but that's not a digital issue. So to me, I don't think the challenge is that we're using digital tools. I think the challenge may be that we're using more effective clinical measurements. That would be my position.
Great, thanks, Leonard. Anyone else want to?
I'd like to make a comment. I mean, ultimately, I agree with Leonard and Matthew in the respect of we're measuring endpoints. We're just using a digital tool by which to do it. So I think right now it's often called digital endpoints because it's a reminder that we still need to validate that component of how we're measuring it. So similar to your temperature or your blood pressure, those all have to be validated measures. Those are all checked and made sure that when we're 98.6, we're really 98.6. And that's what we're doing right now. I think right now we're calling out the digital just to remind people that that still has to be checked. and still needs to be understood. And it could vary from what question you're asking, from study to study, which device is really the best. Do I need 99% accuracy to look at a change, or can I do 65, 70% accuracy to still measure the changes that occur? I think also one of the challenges we're going to have to realize is we may see different things than we saw previously. So your polysomnography brought up that great component. One of the challenges with PSG is you have to be in a sleep lab typically, which disrupts the environment, which may not be what you truly see in a patient at home. And now that you're introducing these at-home measures, they may be as accurate, as sensitive as what you see in the sleep lab, but you may actually see different findings because you're in a different environment and different way to capture it. So those are things also you have to keep in mind as we go down this path, because we're really just looking at a new tool in the toolbox, another piece of the puzzle of these different diseases, looking at these endpoints. We need to make sure they're meaningful to patients, the tools do what they do, but also keep an open mind that what I measure at home may not be identical to what I measured in the clinical lab, because you're in a different setting and you're in a different place, and how you're monitoring over time may be different.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Carrie. Anyone else? Lucy?
Yes, I actually wanted to react to exactly the same thing. So when we know that the technologies are safe, fit for purpose, reliable, usable in the population, it doesn't do a good use to using this technology or good thinking that we will see the same results as we saw with the traditional ones, even though they are the same, even though they have the same sensors, the same readouts, but just because used in a slightly different way or in the patient's home environment or over a long period of time continually, rather than just snapshot measurements that you have every 2 weeks or 3 weeks at the clinic, will provide new results that should be viewed with an open mind. And that's why the comparison or the validation in terms of how they work, yes, that's very good, but we need to keep an open mind about the findings from the actual research that we will learn through these devices about the patients and the diseases themselves.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Okay, so kind of, I guess, somewhat related, I heard a lot of you mention sort of, obviously we have a lot of digital tools, we have a lot of things to measure, we have a lot of endpoints that we can look at. And it really is sort of, in some ways, the devil is in the detail. And there was one person who submitted a question that asked if the panel could comment on tensions between standardization of data collection, because for the long time for clinical trials, we've had very standardized methods for collecting every data element. And what they claim, or what they state as the inevitable difference in signal acquisition by a bring your own device approach. So can any of you kind of talk to that a little bit about, how do we go from, if we're potentially doing clinical trials where we're having people bring their own devices that have lots of different things that we're measuring, and there may be some variability, what are some of the key considerations that we need to be thinking about in terms of moving that forward or moving those types of things forward?
I'm happy to take a crack at that.
Great, thanks, Leonard.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I mean, everybody sees the appeal of using people's own devices, but really, I think they have to be used in context. I mean, they can't be used for very specialized measurements where standardization across these devices is not feasible. So I think one has to think about what these sort of bring your own devices are going to be used for. Now, having said that, specifications are really a tremendous asset in the field, and that's why we have a whole range of different cell phones, and we can all do the same things, and we can communicate perfectly well, and we can probably transmit very good quality pictures that nobody would doubt the value of these. So I think there are many uses of digital devices which are not that specific and specialized that we can rely on specifications. But on the other hand, for more specialized measurements where sensors have to be calibrated and so on, I think these would, at least at this stage in the game, rely on dedicated devices. But I'd be interested to hear what others on the panel think.
And just to add, I think it's a balance. I mean, we certainly want to encourage patients and participants to have the ability to use their own technology whenever possible. It doesn't make sense if someone already has a watch that now they need to wear another watch, for example, or carry around a second phone. These are just very practical considerations about the participants' experience. That being said, I think it's incumbent on the sponsor and the investigator to determine, as Leonard said, what are the requirements or specifications for the specific digital health technologies, or more broadly, general technologies like a cell phone that is necessary for the trial to be successful. And so I think thankfully technology is advancing very rapidly. Cell phone cameras are really universally quite high quality. We have sensors are also improving in their ability and their ubiquity, around us on the products that we wear and in the products that are in our home. And so I think we're moving toward a future where the sensors are already there. They're embedded in our, in where we live, where we work, in our lifestyles. And I think it's important that the clinical trial community is ready to support that infrastructure.
Thanks, Matt. Lucy?
Yeah, if I may comment on the specification and requirements on the devices as BYO, bring your own device, I think we need to realize that what happens with these data afterwards. So they're usually being processed with some kind of algorithm or something that usually simply needs some minimal required quality of the data to work properly. So if you use, for example, some very old device that doesn't have the sensor as good as it should be, then your results are not going to be usable with the readout and with the algorithm. So I think that's why BYOD is a good idea, but it needs to be made sure that the devices meet some requirements when it comes to the quality of the data they're providing to the algorithms that are going to be then processing this data for the final readouts in clinical trials.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Cindy, go ahead.
And just to add to that about bringing your own devices, one, we need to make sure we can provision devices to people who don't have them. But the other is patients could be concerned about the data that's on that device, their personal data. And again, it's an education issue to ensure that their personal data and the other things they do with their phone are not being impacted by using the device for participation in a trial. Right,
great point, Cindy. Carrie?
It's a balance. What's the question you're trying to ask? And there are certain situations where bring your device would be great. It's something I can download, a questionnaire and answer. And again, I agree, Cindy, we have to make sure that the patient fully understands how the data is being handled in the security. But to Lucy's point in mind as well, there are certain measurements that require certain type of sensors, certain specifications ahead of time. And those situations, you would have to have provision devices, or as you said, technology is continuing to improve, but that's where the digital still exists. We have to validate those various sensors to make sure that they'll provide the level of accuracy and sensitivity and specificity for that measure that we're trying to measure. So I think we're going to see a combination of things occur. And again, it always starts with a question. And I firmly agree, Cindy, the patient has to know what's happening with their data, whether it's a BYOD or even a device that's being issued. They should understand how that's being handled, the security behind it, and the transfer.
Yeah, Carrie, just a follow-up to that, if you don't mind. So as technology evolves, we're all in this where, we're updating our iPhone software or yep. All perpetually updating things. So with devices that folks are using, as you mentioned, these things are needing to be updated, and new algorithms are applied, new information is derived. So how do we keep up with that when we're trying to build a clinical trial to assess a drug, and we want to use a digital health technology? What do we do?
So as scientists, as people working in clinical trials, it's really important to identify what version of software you're working on, what version of the algorithm is being used to be tested, and that all has to be identified and one of the first things I was taught in science is you don't change things throughout a study. You maintain that throughout, and you be able to document that accordingly. So as you said, as things improve, yes, you can change versions, et cetera, but you have to acknowledge that that occurred. You have to identify what changed. And as scientists, we have to get better within our clinical trials of identifying, not just clinical trials, but just in general, identifying what version of software we used, what type of sensor we used, and add those types of details to that. So when someone else runs a clinical trial, they understand what versions we use, what types of software, so we can actually appropriately compare study to study and information to information. And if there are differences, be able to explain those.
Great, thanks. Leonard, did you have a comment there too?
I did. I wanted to make sure we don't forget the value of specifications. And I just wanted to remind ourselves that, you know, we use digital devices in clinical medicine all the time. We have a whole range of digital or non-digital devices, things like electrocardiograms and blood pressure machines and glucose monitors, and we use those interchangeably because there are specifications. So I think we have to keep that at the back of our minds as we think of how to bring in a sort of broader spectrum of technologies that patients can use that are convenient. Specifications are a very important tool, and perhaps we're not there for some of the measurements we're making with cell phones and watches, but I think that's an important area to emphasize, and I would probably be interested in hearing more about that during the course of the meeting.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
Matt, did you have a comment? Okay.
Yeah, if I could just add, you know, I think that it really underscores the importance of conversations in the pre-competitive space about these technologies and, you know, the best practices that are emerging. It takes time for consensus standards to be developed. You know, sometimes this, you know, process takes many years, and these technologies are emerging at a pace sometimes that's faster than that. And so working together to acknowledge and develop best practices as these technologies emerge is a really important area. And I also just want to say I really appreciate what you said about you know, investigators taking a really proactive approach to updates to their technology that they use during clinical investigations. And it, you know, it really is a very important step to, number one, be aware of any updates that are being made, to evaluate the impact of those updates, to understand whether the validation that was performed on the initial version of a technology is still valid. You know, there are statistical approaches to account for changes that may have been introduced with different versions, you know, sensitivity analysis and other approaches. And so this is, I think, will only become a more important area as we live in a world where technology advances, and not only may the DHT be updated, but a platform that the DHT may run on is also being updated. So thanks for that.
Great, thank you, Matt. And actually, even building a little bit on that too, where you were talking about sort of pre-competitive space and collaborations and partnering and work together. Lucy, I saw a lot of that in your presentation with regards to all the partners working together, but is there a way that we can facilitate those sorts of pre-competitive collaborations between you know, industry, academia, et cetera? Actually, there was a question that came in about what public-private partnerships are there that are available to industry. So I think this is a question that a lot of people are asking, is that there's a lot of stuff going on, and how do we, is there a way to kind of work collaboratively?
Yes, so there are many ways, definitely. And my best advice would be to keep open eyes towards this collaboration. Not only DIME is doing something like this, but there are many that are coming from specific governments or specific regulatory agencies, whether it's in the US or Europe. There are always calls for proposals. There are organizations like CPAD or CITI that are bringing new topics, new projects, new calls. So I would keep an eye out for all of these in the environment, and make sure that when there is a call for something specific to an organization, a company, whether it's tech sponsor, etc., that is of interest, do not be shy to get involved.
Carrie?
Sometimes we're in a really interesting and cool space, and that we can pre-competitively collaborate. So I think it's important to keep an eye on the different opportunities that arise across all the different organizations, whether they be official or non-official. But even if you have questions, some of the DIME initiatives started with conversations that several of us had about nocturnal scratch. That's an area that I've been working in for a number of years. Several of us got together, we approached DIME and said, hey, this is something that we're really interested in. Can you help facilitate this? And, you know, there are formal pathways, but there's also just conversations that can be initiated and it can help drive these. If you have the questions and you can talk in this pre-competitive space, we can usually in some form or another find a way to facilitate those conversations. And because this is such a new area, I mean, one of the big focuses is determining what's important to the patient, as well as just aligning on language. You know, and Lucy will laugh because I've got to put this in there, Lucy. You know, just as simple as itch and scratch being two terms that are often used interchangeably, but they mean different things. So sitting down as a pharma and saying, okay, how are we going to make sure we do this? What are we going to say when we present this to the regulators to make sure we're all aligned in language? Because I can't imagine them wanting to get 10 different sets of requests and clinical trials with all different language. So having those types of conversations early and usually if you build it, they will come. There's opportunities across if you have those conversations ahead of time.
Yeah, and how do you get the patient perspective in there, I guess, because, you know, that's a hard part, right? So I don't know, Cindy or others, I mean, any thoughts there?
Maybe I can start off. So for every single condition, therapeutic area, there are groups, organizations, patient groups that are fostering community of these patients. Well, starting with maybe some very unofficial Facebook groups, but that happens as well. But they're also really like well-run and official organizations that do a lot for them patients. And for us, for example, working with these organizations has been really powerful to bring in the patient voice from the community. They can reach out either massively if we need some, let's say, survey out, but they can also pinpoint some specific individuals as ambassadors to talk to some specific aspects of their condition. So, for example, some that have been in clinical trials or some that have some specific problem or issue, and these collaborations have been really, really useful. And Cindy, please, I think that you will have.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce what Lucy said. There are patient groups and there are Facebook groups, but we need to recognize that a lot of people are unseen, right? They're not just, they're not on social media. I think the key thing that you said, Lucy, and we've all said is it needs to be personalized and it needs to address every community that you're trying to address to make sure that the input you get at the beginning is as representative as the endpoint at the end. So it could be a challenge, but talking to individual patients is important as well. And some groups are actually taking people through the actual protocol, using the device, et cetera, just to make sure that that what we get is what we wanted.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, look, this is a really great discussion, and it really is a priority for us to ensure that the patient voice is heard, and this input not only comes to us as an agency, but it goes into the development of the products that are being evaluated and into the trials itself. And I think some of the public-private partnerships have been really excellent vehicles for bringing in the patient voice. We participate in now about a dozen collaborative communities across different medical device areas. And this is another venue where the FDA doesn't convene those gatherings, but we participate. You know, we're at the table, and it's an opportunity for a diverse set of stakeholders to get together and focus on medical device topics and to solve problems of common interest. And we regularly have listening sessions at the agency to hear, as has been said, really the individual, personal experiences of folks with a variety of diseases and conditions, and that really has a big impact on our work.
Great, thank you. So kind of related again to this, somebody brought up a question about getting sort of feedback or guidance from caregivers. They called them patient adjacent. I think this is kind of a really interesting question, because now if we do have technologies that we're kind of putting out there in homes that people are doing kind of continuous measurements, how do we best engage, or is there a way to best engage caregivers who are actually being asked to sort of take on more and more of the care for individuals like with dementia and such? How do we get those feedback from them and get them engaged? And is there, what strategies have been done or experiences have you had?
So from a patient perspective, it's incredibly important, right? Especially when you're talking about bringing these tools into people's homes, right? So you talk about the privacy of the participant or the patient, but now you have a device in their home that's tracking the rest of the people as well. So that's a consideration to talk about. I think it all comes down to education and messaging in the beginning, and ensuring that the people that are going to need to help, not even just be a caregiver, but to help with the device and the trial, and maybe the person that would have driven the person to their visits would be that person to kind of be incorporated into the education piece. When to call, who to call, all those, when to charge. These are new responsibilities. It's not necessarily a burden, but it's a new responsibility.
Yeah, and is it possible that there would be endpoints or measures of caregivers that would be helpful? I mean, it gets more, you think more and more about how you mentioned how these things are in people's homes. They're using these devices. Is there, are there things there that would be potentially beneficial?
So Sydney, if it's okay, can I?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one. Go ahead.
I almost want to call them disease adjacent. Their lives are tremendously impacted. So I listened to a mother one time tell me about taking care of their child with atopic dermatitis, the sleep loss, the stress, the financial burden that came with it, and how really hard it was. So traditionally in clinical trials, we measure the patient and improvement in the disease. But with some of these technologies, we can now actually start to understand the impact of not only the quality of life of the patient, but those that are, for lack of a better term, disease adjacent, that are still being impacted, their quality of life, their illness, et cetera, to really think of, they're both patients. They're just in different situations. So where I'm excited is really understanding their perspective, and are there measurements that we can take to see improvements in their lives as well? Because it also is something you want to improve. The idea is if you can treat the disease and improve the patient, most likely you're going to improve the lives of the caregiver. And those are things that we can now measure using these technologies. So it was wonderful to hear. I think everyone should take the opportunity to hear not only from the patients what's important to them, but also hear the caregiver's perspective of what's going on. One of my favorite things I heard is I was asking about nocturnal scratch, and the patient said, I don't scratch at night. And their spouse was sitting next to them and said, my gosh, you do too. You keep me up half the night. But there was insight that we were able to gain. And if I would have just asked the patient, they're like, I'm asleep, I don't know. But the caregiver was able to give us insight, which will allow us to assist in measurement. And also, hopefully, as in the case with the parent and the child, we can improve not only the child's life by understanding and measuring these new endpoints and hopefully developing drugs that will treat them, but also improve those that are adjacent in the families, et cetera, ultimately improving overall quality of life. So I think it's a really almost a new avenue that we get to explore and further understand without a lot of, there's still extra work, but without a whole lot more, and really capture that. So it's an exciting area that we haven't as been easily able to capture previously.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, our efforts are for patients and caregivers, and the role of the caregiver is important, across for patients of all ages, of all levels of functioning. I think the pediatric population is one that stands out, as Carrie mentioned. When we had our patient engagement advisory committee meeting recently on augmented reality and virtual reality, technologies, we heard a lot about, the role of parents in ensuring that these devices were going to be used correctly, appropriately, and the challenges for the whole family that these devices were intended to focus on.
Great, thanks. Lucy?
Yes, I would like to say that I definitely agree that the impacts of caregiver, not of of the disease, is something that is new that digital measures can bring. But also, when you think about it, the patients that cannot report for themselves, like those with dementias or pediatric, now with digital health technologies, we can measure their actions and activities directly, which can actually unburden the caregiver with some of the reports that traditionally they were asked to give. So that's one thing. And the second thing was perhaps how to reach them. So when think about it, the same way how the patient communities and groups and associations come together, the parents, the spouses, the caregivers, they also do come together because they do care for their kids, for the loved ones and families. And it is practically the same way whether you want to reach out to a patient with pain, diabetes, cancer, or a caregiver for someone with a rare disease that is pediatric or dementia, you should be able to find them with the same kind of approaches.
Great. Leonard?
I was just going to comment on a theme that actually Cindy brought up early on, which is the interest of self-tracking by patients. And I think it has a lot of impact on caregivers as well. I mean, I cannot imagine parents who would not be very focused on a child's continuous glucose readings or on a seizure monitor or something like that. And I think that aspect of engagement is really a new advantage of digital technologies. I think, you know, this is partly why some people are so taken up with looking at their smartwatches to see how many steps they did and how much exercise they did and how much sleep. I think there's a lot of curiosity that should be rewarded. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to get engagement from caregivers and patients. It's just another aspect that occurred to me.
Great, thank you, Leonard. So a question here, I guess, sort of thinking about what would be the most substantial challenges facing greater incorporation of DHTs in clinical studies for drugs. What would be sort of your top couple that you would throw out there? I think we've heard some of them today, but I guess I'm trying to pull it together and kind of get your top things. Does anyone want to take a stab at that first?
Well,
Leonard?
start
Oh, I'm sorry.
You start.
Sorry, go.
So
I'll
go ahead,
start bottom up. I mean, patients aren't being offered them because potentially maybe people are afraid of the risk and on the sponsor side. But I think a barrier is people aren't being offered them if you want to go really grassroots on it.
And I think we're going to have a session later on that's going to talk a little bit about trial access and get maybe a little bit more in depth there. But I think you're right. I think that it's, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But if we're not meeting patients where they're at, then we're not going to be able to get them in the clinical trials, right? So, Leonard?
I'm sort of going to pick up on the theme of risk. I think that's the thing that's really the biggest obstacle. I think everybody in their own constituency sees risks because these are unknown areas to a point. I think regulators are nervous because they haven't been used as traditional measurements. I think industry is nervous because they haven't been used as traditional industry endpoints. Patients are nervous because they don't know what's going to be measured. And I really think that that's the challenge for this meeting, is to figure out how to cross that threshold and develop comfort using these things like we do in other areas of daily life. I mean, nobody's scared of using a cell phone. So we've got to be able to figure out a way of crossing that bridge. And, you know, I sort of make the point that science and data are probably our best friends in that regard. But I think this is really the biggest challenge for all of us, is it's the fear of the unknown and how to bridge that. And that's really a very important topic that I would like to hear about.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. Carrie?
So one of the biggest, I think, challenges we see is that adoption piece, as you commented, Leonard, at all different levels. And I think as we've moved, and I've been in this field for a number of years, as we're starting to collect this data and we're starting to get those that are willing to take those risks, we're being able to demonstrate that there is value, that we can measure things that haven't been there before. But there's a lot of discussions, a lot of presentations that have to be given at all fronts, from the digital field demonstrating it does accuracy and, you know, in that aspect, to explain to the patient that this is no different than measuring your step count or closing your rings, or answering a question on your surveys, to the healthcare provider to show that this is a new endpoint that's providing them more information. And a lot of that is going to boil down to the data that's created. I know when I had one of my first conversations with a healthcare provider, they said, yeah, it's just another device. And when I was able to show them some data behind it, that we're able to measure it accurately, that we're able to see changes, all of a sudden they're like, okay, now talk to me. And I think bringing that data, and as we're continuing to adopt and see these things come forward, we're going to see more and more adoption of this, and it's going to become more of the norm. As you said, Leonard, another step count's no longer, I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that we'd all be walking around trying to close rings and get to 7,000, 10,000 steps? It's going to take some time and a lot of effort to demonstrate the value of what we're doing. And once we see those endpoints start to go and we start to see those floodgates open, I'm hoping we're going to see more and more adoption throughout.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Lucy?
Yeah, and I wanted to say that when it comes to challenges, you can ask 10 different people and each of them will give you a different answer from their specific background. So a data scientist will tell you, oh, but we need new ways how to analyze the data because these are all new data and everyone needs to be on the same page. You know, the regulators will tell you, but we need everything to be standardized and everyone to use the same thing. The clinical research manager will tell you, oh, but the operations is the challenge, the deployment. Like, how do we actually get a watch from point A to point B, and then at the end of the trial make sure that either, you know, the patient keeps the watch or they ship it back or stuff like that. But from my perspective, as I had the chance to see all of these different facets, I would agree with Cindy that access is one of the biggest challenges, because some of the people don't know what is that they can participate on a trial, that let's say they have a phone or they have a watch, but they can use it to some specific purpose. And that's why going through either their general practitioners or sites or specific clinicians or community managers or like somebody, organization that they are in touch with to have to bring access to larger groups and communities of people would be something to keep in mind, but still is not perfect. And there need to be some new ways how the people can find out that, yes, they can participate in research and they can use some of the technologies they already have at home.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Matt, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, sure. I think these challenges really underscore the importance of some of the priorities that we discussed. You know, we talk about risk. I think, you know, it's why we really tried to provide as much regulatory clarity and predictability, you know, through guidance and other means. And I think for the community to really truly hear the message that the most important thing to ensure that a digital health technology is fit for purpose, or a DHT derived endpoint, the most important things are the same as for more traditional endpoints. I mean, are you measuring the right thing? Are you measuring it well? And I think it's sometimes challenging for individuals or individual companies to invest in the initial validation of these new methods. And so the more that can be done pre-competitively, I think really will help to move the field forward.
Great, thank you. So we only have a couple minutes left. And so what I thought I would do, about 2 minutes, wanted to ask you a question and just give me, 30-second response. And that's basically, what do you anticipate DHTs, how do you anticipate DHTs changing clinical studies in the near term? And I mean, just kind of high level, what are you looking forward to? The most optimistic thing you're looking for DHTs in changing clinical studies in the very short term. None of us have a crystal ball, obviously. So I thought I'd just do a quick round robin with everyone here. Leonard, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, I think we have to look at the low-hanging fruit, and we have to look at, the areas which are giving us the most value. I mean, there are many trials where traditional measurements are fine and we're doing very well. But for rare diseases, for diseases with clinical features which are difficult to measure, where we have clumsy tools like the 6-minute walk test, like some of the some of the score sheets, which are not objective and don't make objective measurements. I think those are the areas that are probably going to see the biggest sort of benefit from these tools in the short term. So I would be looking to rare diseases and diseases where metrics are troublesome. I mean, we know that there are a lot of diseases where discrimination of drug effect is challenging. There may be sort of early stages in a disease which we're really not able to discern with current tools. So I think those are the exciting areas where we can really find sort of a scientific opportunity to advance the field. And then, you know, maybe probably in due course they'll become more commonplace in other diseases where traditional measurements are at this point relatively satisfactory.
Great, thanks, Leonard. Anyone else want to try to tackle that? Lucy?
Yeah, so from my perspective, what I'm excited about digital health technologies bringing to trials is the potential to bring new and high quality scientific information about specific diseases, populations, patients that can actually improve how we develop drugs, devices, or any products that are targeting these people. So if you do it right, we will learn a lot of new, and I think that is exciting for everyone that is here.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I liked your comment about value acquired knowledge in your presentation. Thanks, Lucy. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, Nancy, these are very exciting times. And I think that digital health technologies have the potential now and are already ushering in a new era of precision medicine, right? I mean, we have oncology trials where patients are being treated for the specific genetics of their individual tumors. There are trials where the administration of blood thinners are based on whether a patient is in AFib on a moment-to-moment basis. And you know, this really has the potential to change the way that medicine is practiced. So it's not only about shifting us to trials that are focused on drugs, where everyone in the trial gets the same drug, to really more patient-centered trials, where patients receive, you know, the right therapy at the right time for their individual condition. It's about moving the practice of medicine there as well. And so the ability of these technologies to you know, collect new types of information, to collect information throughout the lifespan in patient's home environment is really very exciting, very promising. And to do that with the potential to, you know, increase access, increase diversity in clinical trials, and increase equity. It's really, really exciting.
Great. Carrie, a few remarks, and then I'll give Cindy the closeout.
Sounds great. We're getting a new tool in the toolbox. We're going to understand these diseases in a quantitative, longitudinal way that we haven't been able to before. From a clinical trial perspective, we can more properly select the population that we want to go into the trial because we understand quantitatively some of the changes that are occurring. I agree, Leonard, there's some great opportunities in diseases that have traditionally been challenging to monitor, whether it be just based on visual assessment or clinical assessments or patient-reported outcomes. Now we'll have those quantitative measures. And I'm excited about the pediatric population. We're giving kids a voice. We're going to actually be able to quantitatively see how they slept, how they scratched, versus being dependent on someone watching and observing and seeing the outward signs of things. So I completely agree. I think we're really excited. We're going to start to see these things start to come to play, and it's an exciting space. And I agree. I'm going to set you up, Cindy, properly. I'm excited to be able to see more patients be involved. And I'll give that to you, Cindy.
Yeah, so I guess I'm struggling with the immediate the low-hanging fruit part, because I see this as an amazing opportunity for all patients to have the ability to participate in research. I mean, you can carry it around in your pocket or wear it on your wrist. That's not immediate. But I think immediate term, we can demonstrate, because the key here is going to be to communicate this, to demonstrate that we're eliminating some of the major barriers people have to participate in research, and that's just getting to it. And so I think we can kind of address that and quickly.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. I'm sorry we cut into the break a little bit today. We're going to be coming back after, it looks like about a 6-minute break. So coming back at 3 o'clock for session 2, which will be moderated by Dr. Lola Fashoyinaje from the FDA. So please join us back at 3 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.
So good afternoon, everybody. I am Lola Fashoyinaje. I'm a medical oncologist and deputy director for one of the clinical divisions in the Office of Oncologic Diseases in CDER at the FDA. And I also lead Project Equity, which is an initiative in the FDA Oncology Center of Excellence that aims to improve the diversity of oncology clinical trial participants, and the lead author for the FDA's recent draft guidance on diversity plans. It's really an honor to have been invited to participate and moderate this session 2, which is titled Impact of Digital Health Technologies on Clinical Trial Accessibility and Diversity. As a bit of background, FDA has a long-standing posture in clinical trial diversity, which emphasizes diversity in clinical trials as an important aspect that informs the safe and effective use of medical products, because it facilitates generalizability of study results to the population for which the medical products are intended. Additionally, an ethical consideration for clinical research is that all populations are able to contribute to and benefit from the scientific advances, including in the context of clinical trials. But as we all know, diversity has not been a major focus in drug development, at least not with the consistency and prospective consideration or at the scale that is needed to improve upon the disparate participation rates of certain populations that we see in clinical trials today. So in 2022, the agency issued a draft guidance on diversity plans to provide a framework for developing a prospective plan that includes explicit goals for enrolling a diverse population in clinical trials for drugs, biological products, and devices. And more recently, as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act was enacted, and it includes provisions for clinical trial diversity and modernization. And these include an amendment to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to require the submission of diversity action plans as a measure to increase enrollment of subjects from historically underrepresented population. So this new legislation really brings into focus even more the importance of equity in drug development. And as my colleagues from the FDA noted in session 1, the use of digital health technologies in clinical trials provides an opportunity to increase access to clinical trials and can decrease the burden associated with clinical trial participation that may be a deterrent for enrollment and retention of historically underrepresented populations. So with that background, in this session, presenters and panelists will discuss how the use of digital health technologies may improve clinical trial accessibility during drug development for diverse populations, defined really broadly to consider race, ethnicity, sex, age, gender, socioeconomic status, geography, and many other sociodemographic features. So Dr. Klaus Gottlieb, who is Vice President at Eli Lilly, who oversees the Immunology Business Unit's Digital Health AI group, will kick off with the first of 2 presentations today in this session. So Dr. Gottlieb, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. My talk is entitled Digital Strategies for Improving Recruitment and Diversity in Clinical Trials, and I have 10 slides. Please advance. So how could digital health tools help improve recruitment and diversity in clinical trials? They could help overcome geographical barriers, streamline the recruitment process, enhance patient engagement, improve data quality, and address language and cultural barriers. Next slide, please. Dermatology is a good field for the development of digital health tools for 2 reasons. First, there's a great unmet medical need, and enrollment bias is large. Pivotal clinical trials in dermatology enroll predominantly Caucasian patients, regardless of where the study was actually conducted. This is despite the varying populations, demographics of different countries and continents. Dermatology is also currently the second least diverse medical specialty after orthopedic surgery, with only a minority of physicians identified or represented. Improvement is subject to be discovered, but I think it might. In addition, when it comes to making clinical trials as fully remote as possible, dermatology is a prime candidate because photography can adequately capture the endpoint
I think we're having some technical difficulties. Dr. Gottlieb, can you hear us? You're on mute.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened. Let's just continue. I was just saying that in addition, when it comes to making clinical trials fully remote, dermatology is a prime candidate because photography can adequately capture the endpoints. The taking of photos does not require a fixed location, and psoriasis is particularly suitable for remote assessment, and the scoring of nail psoriasis does not require a full body scan. So next slide, please. So while the prevalence of psoriasis in the United States is highest in white individuals, 3.7%, followed by blacks, 2% psoriasis is actually more severe in the African-American population. Despite the lower prevalence in general, psoriasis in darker skinned people is often characterized by less distinguishable erythema or redness, increased risk of pigmentation changes, and thicker plaques, more scaling, and greater body involvement than in white people. Nail psoriasis is a common condition seen in about 10 to 78% of patients with ordinary psoriasis, and that goes up to 70 to 80% of patients with psoriatic arthritis. It's very difficult to treat. We are conducting an observational study where patients get their nails scored and photographed in a physician's office as usual. In addition, the patients or their caregivers obtain photographs of their nails at home using an app on their own smartphones. How this works in practice, you will see hopefully shortly. The images we obtain are scored by well-trained non-physician lay readers and validated by dermatologists. All of our data are then used to train a machine learning algorithm. So the hope is that the whole process can be fully automated, done at home, and be more standardized and reproducible. If patient travel is less of an issue, we think recruitment can be extended to geographic areas that have traditionally been neglected. These are not necessarily rural areas because certain urban areas with poor availability of public transport are also problem spots. So the next slide, please. So can you try and run this video? It's fairly short. There we go. So this is how it works in practice. And people have acquired familiarity with these types of prompts. And then you get a message about lighting, positioning, and the overall acceptability of your image you're taking, the pose and the focus. And we're almost done with the video here. So after you've acquired all these poses, you're ready to upload them to the central server. And that's how we capture the data. Then next slide, please. Just skip to the next one. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's the one. Let's switch from psoriasis to atopic dermatitis, also known as eczema. The photos on the left side compare the appearance of atopic dermatitis on dark and white skin. Interestingly, when I was looking for images in the public domain of atopic dermatitis in Black patients, despite the fact that the atopic dermatitis prevalence in children is higher in African Americans, about 19% compared to European Americans, 16%, I couldn't find a whole lot of images, which kind of attests to the problems we're kind of facing in our clinical trials. Now for the differences, erythema is harder to see and evaluate. It has more of a violaceous character like seen here. Inflammatory pigment changes are not part of the usual scoring algorithm, and as prurigo-like lesions are more common, and the patient perception of the disease is also different, and self-examination is more difficult. Next slide, please. So Lilly has championed the use of digital health tools that objectively quantify post-inflammatory pigmentation changes in intensely pigmented skin. And it's very difficult to do subjectively, but there are technical solutions. Specifically, we're addressing post-inflammatory pigment changes, which are common in dark skin, by taking direct measurements with the Maximeter spectroscopy device and measuring erythema directly with the Scarlet Red platform. We are confident that investigators may perceive this innovation as an inducement to recruit dark-skinned patients, and patients may recognize that their unmet medical needs are being better addressed. Next slide. There are obviously operational and regulatory barriers to the widespread use of DHTs in clinical trials. Their use needs to be balanced with the patient burden. You know, patients are going to start running around with multiple variables, multiple apps on their phones, which they have to activate at different times of the day, and the clinical utility. Maybe it's not quite as useful as we think. We also find it difficult to find development partners, especially people who take the proof of concept studies we have and help us scale them up, or help with development of foundational algorithms. So we've had some initial discussions with some of the big 5 tech companies, but we have kind of, the interest was kind of mixed, and mostly it seems like they would like to focus on the development of devices for the consumer market. But I hold it to them that actually the clinical trial environment is a wonderful way of developing this to make it ready for more widespread use for a consumer application. And next slide. So digital health technologies are being developed rapidly, but the regulatory pathways for the inclusion apparently have not kept up. At least that's our sensation. There is uncertainty around validating remotely captured images as endpoints. So sponsors must still validate the DHTs against the gold standard through concurrent exploratory studies, which kind of goes to the patient burden and the burden on the clinical trial itself. To address this, a risk-based regulatory framework involving a sliding scale of evidentiary requirements and studies should be adopted for the use of DHTs in clinical trials. Clarifying if and to what extent prior evidence can be leveraged would also be helpful, as would more up-to-date guidance for fully remote data capture tools. The FDA's work with the PDUFA 7 commitments is encouraging, and all stakeholders look forward to working together. And then it's my last slide. I just wanted to thank Derek Onken in Advanced Analytics and Data Science, and Sri Kumar Pillai in Immunology Development for leading these 2 trials you just heard about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gottlieb. So next we'll have a presentation from Dr. Patrick Gee, who is the founder and chief executive of Hope Dealer at iVocate, a faith-based health and wellness organization that serves the undervalued, underserved, and disenfranchised communities of color. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm here today just to share the patient perspective. I am a former peritoneal and in-center hemodialysis patient. I began doing dialysis in April of 2013. I was able to get a kidney transplant April the 21st, 2017. after some challenges with doing dialysis, and I had a very tumultuous transplant journey. When I woke up from the surgery, the kidney was not working. So I had to end up doing 24 hours of dialysis every other day. In the midst of that, in total, I spent 33 days in the hospital. During that time in the hospital, I ended up having 4 different surgeries, 6 days doing physical therapy and rehab, and my kidney didn't start functioning until the 47th day. So actually next month makes the 6-year anniversary of my kidney transplant. So when I think about digital health technology, it has literally been extremely beneficial for me. It has enabled me to be able to track my health data, to monitor my symptoms, and to be able to communicate with my care team more effectively. The data that I've collected has enabled me to make more informed decisions about my care and manage my conditions a whole lot better. DHTs has made it easier for me to access resources such as educational material and support groups, which has truly helped me to understand and manage my condition more effectively. One of my favorite DHTs is my Apple Watch. With that, I'm able to track my steps. I can check my heart rate, my heartbeat. I'm able to take time to meditate. I can also log in my water intake and even use certain apps to where I can also get a reminder of when I need to take my medications. If I fail to take my medication or am late for taking a medication, I get updates with certain apps connected to my Apple Watch that will send me reminders about clinical trials dealing with diabetic kidney disease, because that is how I lost my kidneys. In the kidney field, there was another organization that also developed an app that was extremely beneficial for when I was managing my kidney disease as well as my type 2 diabetes. It allowed me to log in my daily glucose levels. It measured my urine output. It checked on my mood. It asked me certain questions to be able to gauge my particular mental health for that particular day. And I thought that that was extremely beneficial. When it comes to using digital health technologies in a clinical setting, I will never forget the very first time I was introduced to clinical trials is when I really started dialysis. There was a clinical trial that wanted to give each user a digital weight scale, an electronic blood pressure machine, and a webcam. And what they wanted us to use this for is that anytime we stepped on the scale, anytime we took our blood pressure, it would automatically send this information to the nurses at our dialysis center. The webcam was for, this was like the initial beginning of us learning about telehealth. So instead of patients having to go into the clinic maybe every other month, if you didn't need to draw labs, anything like that, you can just stay at home and just have a conversation with your physician by way of telehealth. These things were very beneficial, but I did have an initial drawback for a clinical trial that I wanted to participate in. And when I brought it to the attention of the the dialysis facility, I was met with resistance. They told me that I could not participate in this clinical trial, and the exact wording that they used was, "He who owns the data owns the patient." So in other words, if the dialysis facility could not benefit or profit from my participation in the clinical trial, from the data that the trial team would get, then I could not participate in the clinical trial. So that was very concerning for me when it came to patient data collection. And this was just one of the things that I thought was a concern for users of digital health technologies in clinical settings. And with that, you know, I always wanted to make sure that the users were engaged, and that it was essential to understand their needs and preferences and the design of the technology to meet them. Additionally, providing users with adequate training and support is essential to ensure that they can use the technologies effectively and efficiently. And finally, having a feedback loop to capture user feedback and use it to improve the technology is critical to ensure continued success. Also in my field, I also understood that there was a number of barriers, such as data collection, privacy protections and stuff like that, that I also thought was essential for creating an effective digital health system. And to this, it is extremely imperative for trialist teams to really collaborate with stakeholders across the healthcare system to ensure that patient data is collected and stored securely. Additionally, patient education and awareness should be a priority to ensure that patients understand the benefits and the risk of using digital health technologies. And here again, I really can't stress patient education is a critical step in improving healthcare. When you think about investing in research and development to create innovative solutions, implementing data-driven strategies to improve healthcare outcomes, and increasing the availability of healthcare services in underserved, undervalued, and disenfranchised communities is really essential in improving healthcare. Additionally, providing healthcare professionals with ongoing training and education on the latest advancement in healthcare technologies and best practice can certainly help ensure quality care for all of those involved. And some of those trainings can certainly consist of cultural diversity, cultural humility, and, you know, certain training such as that. A lot of times what I found out when I work with various underserved communities is that they aren't aware of clinical trials, and they don't even get this information from their primary cares or their initial medical providers, and that is really sad. I know historically, when you talk about minoritized communities, you hear things about lack of trust. We can certainly talk about social determinants of health. We can certainly even bring in the mental duress about trying to use digital health technologies that folks who may be over the age of 65, some may not have adequate smartphones to be able to download these particular apps to be able to use them, or those that may live in rural areas that may not have access to broadband. And then you just have some folks that are extremely afraid of change. And digital health technology is now the future of where we're getting ready to go. But some folks believe in going to a brick and mortar, sitting in front of a person, to be able to engage with them. So here again, I really believe that this brings about an opportunity for further engagement with the community. So as I get ready to close this out, when I think about more diversity and inclusivity of clinical trials, I always think about the clinical trial team. And I like to remind people from a community standpoint, folks want to see more PIs that look like the people that they're trying to bring into the trial. A lot of times we don't really see that, which can kind of put the antennas up for lack of mistrust, lack of understanding. People don't really know where I'm coming from. They don't understand my community. They don't speak my language. They don't understand my culture. And these are particular barriers now that can kind of hinder an effective and effective way for these particular technologies to be able to work. So I would also say when engaging or trying to diversify clinical trials, you might want to utilize innovative approaches to ensure access to clinical trials for all populations. This includes creating online or virtual clinical trials or increasing access to clinical trial sites in underserved areas. It is developing a comprehensive patient engagement strategy that includes patient education, support, and feedback. Also talking about enhancing the accuracy and completeness of clinical trial data by utilizing more sophisticated data collection and analysis tools. Also may want to think about designing clinical trials focused on patient experience, including patient-reported outcomes and quality of life measures. Also in clinical trials, may want to think about using the use of real-world data to inform clinical trial designs, including creating a way of including a patient advisory council or maybe a community advisory council as a part of the clinical trialist team. And lastly, I really want to end with this. This is an extraordinary opportunity for me to be able to share with members of the FDA. Normally, I would ask, what is a patient or who is a patient? And if we can be perfectly honest, we are all patients. We are all suffering from some ailment or abnormality. So when engaging with others, when it comes to clinical trials and it comes to digital health technologies, just think about how you would want somebody to be open, honest, transparent, and engaged with you, and just do the same thing for the folks that you're really trying to get to understand these particular technologies. So thank you very much for allowing me to share my perspective.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gee. I think you've given us our charge, our marching orders here for this next part of the session, the moderated panel. I'd like to invite Dr. Gottlieb and the other panelists to join us now on camera so we can begin this discussion session.
I think my video needs to be enabled.
I also want to thank Dr. Guns on how we can use his digital diagnostic and in the sort of the diagnostic process, as well as potentially even the screening for enrollment in clinical trials. So I want to start off by inviting Dr. Peters to really provide your perspective on the opportunities for DHTs to improve access to clinical trials. And for you and the other panelists who have not had an opportunity to introduce yourselves, if you could just briefly give a brief introduction for the group so they know who you are and sort of your relevant expertise on this topic before you answer, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, so hi everybody. I'm Dr. Ann Peters. I'm a diabetologist and I work in Los Angeles where I actually run a research center embedded in a comprehensive health center. We've worked there for over 20 years, and we take care of a population in East Los Angeles, which is under-resourced and primarily Latino. And we started using DHTs in our clinical research about 20 years ago. And in the beginning, it reduced access because we got kicked out of multi-center trials and sponsored trials because our population couldn't adequately use the DHT technology, and they really couldn't keep up. So we've gone back to the drawing board and figured out how to make it work. And the most important thing is to assume nothing, because I don't know really what it is that my patients need. So we have focus groups, and we've really worked hard to create the things that our patients need to use DHT, which includes things like they don't even have an email address. That's what you have to use for most DHTs. They don't understand the instruction manual because it's written in too high a literacy level, or it's not written in Spanish. So I think that to take away from my experiences, I've really learned how to use DHTs, but I had to use my patients themselves to teach me how to teach them. It takes me longer to train any patient on a DHT than say in other kinds of participants, just because they're not used to technology. And then the final thing is that most of them can't do a 100% remote kind of study. We have to have in-person access for our patients to come in if they need us to show us how to do things, how to push buttons, how to wear something. And then most of them, after they've gotten used to the technology, then kind of wean off coming in to see us. Again, it depends on the individual, but I think that we have to really think about how does a population, how does an individual need to use DHT, and how can we make it accessible to them, and really what resources can we offer them?
That's great. So I want to pivot here and also invite Mr. Swift to the conversation. Can you provide your perspective, having heard what Dr. Gee just mentioned, all of the really great points that he made about access and how we could use these technologies? Can you talk about this from your perspective as a sponsor, developer of these?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for having me on. Much of my work happens to be in the same communities that Dr. Peters and Dr. Gee will focus on as well. From a lot of the things that we've learned from doing about 19 trials so far across the US, actually even outside of the US, is that how do we look at embedding even the process of DHTs in communities that are discrete, are in austere locations, are in hard to reach locations, right? Where there isn't any infrastructure. So part of what we've done is being able to translate analog devices and analog products into specific DHT frameworks, right? So we know that in the US, 20% of the Americans will have a flip phone, right? They're not going to have the access to smartphone availability or any access to any type of infrastructure there is already. And you can multiply that by 3 in outside US locations, where we've done work in Ghana, we've done work in Eritrea, Morocco, we've done work in Southeast Asia. So we've learned that it compounds exponentially on how do we need to embed DHT into a daily life cycle. So from our approach, even with some of the senior centers that we've done work with the VA, in connection with the VA, is that how do we look to embed, even though that they may have difficulty understanding technology as it is, how do we embed the process of aggregating information to help them make informed decisions? We've actually piloted a project where we're using specific vans, logistic vans for senior centers that will get them from one place to the next, whether they're picking up from their home to get to the senior center. We're going to actually embed sensors into specific vehicles so that it acknowledges that one patient or that one person, so that it gives them a sense of, this is what your to-do list is for today, and make sure that you go see what, so-and-so. And then as soon as they walk into that door, they're going to be facilitated through the use of digital mechanisms to get into those locations so that they can be able to have representation there, right? So they don't have to use because for the most part, many of them will have diminished mental acuity. So we're going to have to guide them into specific or specificity areas so that we can power DHTs for them, whether it's being able to guide them, whether it's going to be able to also migrate them towards like routine habits, make sure that we're focusing them on accommodating on a daily basis, right? What they need to be able to measure, what they be able to do, but guide them specifically. Where we're not giving them the devices, we're giving them into the community areas where they're going to be able to be guided as well.
Great. I think, you and Dr. Gee have made some great points, and Dr. Peters made some great points about the importance of educating the population on the use of the digital health technologies. I did also hear you mention sort of the customizing, digital, digital tools, for lack of a better term, that are already available to patients, and making them sort of fit for use in a clinical trial, a clinical study. And so I just wanted to ask, and Dr. Gottlieb, do you have any thoughts about that as a sponsor of clinical trials, about such customization and the suitability of that kind of an approach for a clinical trial that could support registration, for example, of a new product?
Yeah, I think I do. Let me see whether I'm on mute. No, I'm not. So I'm a big friend, and a lot of people are bring your own device. And because what we've seen with other devices is that, for example, the accessibility to the Wi-Fi network or internet access or whatever, it can be very problematic if you have a second device, because it may use a cellular network. And in any case, people already pre-select their network when they have their own device, and that's mostly functional because they use it all the time. So kind of piggybacking on that infrastructure patients have already established for themselves sounds like a good idea, because they know how to use the device, they know how the apps are running on this device. And so, for example, for our NAPSI trial, the one where we looked at the nail psoriasis, we actually put apps on their respective Android and iPhones. And we actually had extensive user testing before to make sure that works. And I think that's probably the better approach. There will be instances where that's not possible, because we just heard that a certain, 20% of people have flip phones, and we don't want to marginalize them. So they will need either some kind of a device which can stand in for that, or some other solution. There's something, since I have the audience now, I think we should also make sure that we don't overestimate how digital health tools can kind of broaden our diversity, because what we've learned from the pandemic is that oftentimes the people who mostly embrace it have earned more than $100,000, are white Americans. They tend to be younger and they're highly educated. These were the people who were embracing like video phone calls during the pandemic. And if we just think that we build it and people will come, I think we're mistaken. We also have to kind of listen to our social scientists who are just about to establish a framework around the equity of digital health tools. And there's a lot to be learned, and some of that should be supported by us as well.
Great. That's a great comment. I want to bring in Dr. Castillo to the conversation, because I know you have some great ideas and actually great practical experience with the use of this in a particular study. Could you unmute yourself and sort of share your perspective on this topic?
Absolutely. And Lola, thank you for having me in this panel. And I'm very excited to be part of this important discussion. So just to give some background, I am a medical doctor and epidemiologist at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. And my work centers around developing evidence for the safety and effectiveness of treatments in pediatric and young adult populations who are underrepresented in research. So those with complex mental health needs. Some of my work has focused on the use of psychotropic treatments in this group, and also in understanding the benefit-risk perspectives of caregivers of this patient population. More recently, we have a collaboration with the FDA through our MCRC, through which we have developed a mobile app that can be used both by adolescents and their caregivers to measure symptoms among those that have mood disorders. And as others have mentioned, some of the challenges are pretty similar in regards to bringing your own device, needing to educate patients. But I wanted to bring forward some of the unique challenges that we faced in this population that also speak to other aspects of equity. And one of the first ones is, how do we develop technologies that empower and acknowledge neurodiversity? And neurodiversity, I guess, understood as individuals who have diverse cognitive or behavioral traits. And this is not unique to adolescents with mood disorders, but certainly youth with mental health disorders or behavioral issues are typically underrepresented in research, as their underlying conditions are usually seen as an exclusion criteria. So the interactions with technology and the value of those interactions may actually be different for this population than when we test the same devices and the same sensors to similar adolescents without mental health conditions. As was mentioned in the previous panel, there is a huge gap in our understanding of how these technologies can be used to characterize history of disease, as this would give us insights in regards to the limitations and adaptations that are needed for these technologies to be able to be used by a broader set of patients. I do think that, by addressing this gap, we could potentially ensure that the development of newer technologies actually allows individuals with diverse abilities to access and use them. And I do acknowledge that some technologies actually have accessibility features, but they may not be sufficient for certain populations. The second aspect that I want to bring up also for discussion is the role of caregivers, which can be both a facilitating or a limiting factor for participation in research. And as you suspect, of course, in pediatric populations, caregivers are critical, both in clinical trials and observational studies. But what we also see most commonly is that caregivers or children that are usually engaged are mostly white, mostly with higher education, and mostly from higher socioeconomic status. And we know very little about how digital technologies can potentially empower more diverse caregivers and to potentially optimize also the benefits among the people they provide caregiving for, in my case, pediatric populations, but it could also be applicable to others.
Great, thank you so much. I think I want to circle back here to Dr. Gee, who sort of started us off on the patient perspective. Are there, I think we all recognize the potential that digital health technologies have in sort of helping us to enroll and to retain more diverse populations. And by diverse, I'm thinking of this very broadly. So not just race and ethnicity, but, older adults, as Dr. Castillo just mentioned, people with, diverse sort of cognitive and behavioral abilities, children and so forth. But are there populations for whom we have some concern about the use of these technologies or the appropriateness of using some of these technologies? And what are those barriers, and how can we overcome them? Can they be overcome? So I want to go back to you, Dr. Gee. In your work, are there certain populations or certain characteristics of a digital health technology, for example, that would be less optimal to use in a particular population?
There is currently a population that I'm working with. The zip code is the 29203. So last year, there was an article that was written called, the name of the article was Cut Off. This particular zip code had the largest number of diabetic amputees in the Deep South, the second largest in the nation. And when I went to visit last year, it was deplorable. The total family median income was less than $22,000. One of the largest medical providers is in that area, but when you think about access to broadband, just people's willingness to want to participate, they're very defeated because nobody really wants to help them in this situation. I was actually working with a company that was developing a heart digital health app for them that would allow them to be able to put in some of the things that I had talked about before, steps and stuff like that. We did a number of in-home visits, found that some people were still using radios from the 70s, televisions that still had the tubes in them. A lot of them had track phones, and it's hard to do anything with a track phone. Lack of access to physicians or a medical clinic. I'm not going to say that it can't be used in that area, but they would definitely need to invest in the infrastructure to be able to build around to make digital health more accessible and acceptable. But here again, how do you do that when you have 9 dialysis centers in this zip code and 22 dialysis centers within a 15-mile radius of the zip code? So it's almost like it's more profitable to keep folks away from this technology versus changing the infrastructure and investing in the people and the area to build up the infrastructure to bring in these technology to be able to engage with them and literally save their lives.
Yes, thank you for that. I think you raise a really important issue, which is about the infrastructure. And I think sometimes, addressing that barrier is very challenging for any one sponsor to do, because it's really a much larger kind of societal issue. And I think that the trick is sort of finding ways that we can sort of address those types of barriers collectively, much more broadly and than in the context of a clinical study. Dr. Peters, sorry?
Oh, one more thing that I wanted to add when it comes to the disparity. The bulk of the zip code, single mothers, the bulk of the population over the age of 65, and unemployment.
Yeah. I mean, these are the same barriers that we encounter in kind of the traditional clinical trial setting. And it's disappointing to hear them sort of also be barriers in the use of these technologies, which are really the great promise of them is that you're able to reach these populations. Dr. Peters, can you talk a little bit about how you have in your work overcome some of these challenges, some of these structural challenges that exist in kind of our healthcare ecosystem, solutions that you have come up with in your work?
Great. And Dr. Gee, I love what you're talking about, and I feel so sorry for these populations. I mean, it's just, we're having an incredible increase in rates of amputation in LA County, and we don't understand why. And it's a really hard battle to fight. Now, that being said, I have to say one thing about contraindications to devices is that I have had patients who've either overreacted to the blood sugars, because I do glucose monitoring. So I have some developmentally disabled adults who get much worse if I put them on a continuous monitor because they overdose insulin because they don't understand it. So you have to be able to understand the data. And then I've had 2 patients, one who was bipolar who became manic because he suddenly saw too much data. And I had another patient who became psychotic because he saw too much data. And so you've got to remember that the person seeing data in real time may have a reaction to that data, and you've got to contain it. But the things that I've done that have really helped is that, first of all, I've been in the community for a very long time. I've done community participatory research, which means that I do focus groups in both East and South LA. And all of the people who work for me are from the communities. And so the communities trust us. And I think trust is the number 1, 2, and 3 aspect of how I get successful use of DHTs in our patients. And then I've had outside funding through private foundations that have paid for me to create low literacy teaching manuals and guides so that patients, when they come in, aren't shown something that's 370 pages that's written at an 11th grade level that they can't use. And we just have this really consistent staff. And I always let my staff decide if this is a trial we should be doing, if this is a tool that would help. And because we've done this so much, we have a sense of it. So recently we just took on another trial using a hyperclosed loop pump that I thought we shouldn't try. And my patients and my staff wanted to do it because they thought it would be really important to show that they could use this technology in our population. So I think that it's the notion of, I'm not the person who knows everything. In fact, I may be the person who knows the least, but I can get us grant funding and support and guidance to do this. And I also work with the whole county of Los Angeles so that we're able to implement things on a countywide basis. So I would say that I think it really just requires really hard work on the behalf of champions. And I think that's the people who are on this call and hopefully listening, to get the devices used in trials to use successfully, but it's always about what that population needs, whether it's older, whether it's younger, whatever it is, it's not going to be the same. But I really think this is well worth the effort it takes to try to change things.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to switch to Mr. Swift here and ask you a question that actually is important, I think, is sort of getting that patient input as we are developing these digital health tools. Do you have any experience in this space, or can speak to this as to how we can really incorporate the patient perspective as we develop the tools, and also as we assess the appropriateness of using these tools in a given population?
No, absolutely. And Dr. Swift is fine, right? You can, I think you're kind of going back and forth. Okay. But no, absolutely. So one of the things that we always think about is how adaptable are communications to specific people, right? We learned that communications to people who are in Northwest Alaska versus people who are in some of the underlying areas, low-lying areas in Ghana, right? They respond very differently, vastly differently to each other. So the way that we have to think about DHTs is that how do we imprint ways on communicating directly to them, right? And if we're going to validate, biomarkers, if we're going to validate any specific, correspondence about any condition or diagnosis, we have to think through it through their lens, right? And one of the aspects in which we thought of was digital fencing. And one of the mechanisms or techniques that we have had success in is being able to utilize digital fencing mechanisms to communicate to groups, no matter what type of device that they have, whether it's analog, i.e. split phone, or smartphone, right? It's being able to utilize a communication strategy in a cadence to be able to get them, for one, to get them engaged, as well as being able to then understand the logistics of their situation. All right. So then we're being able to design, so we'll call a patient, we'll be able to communicate with a patient, and then being able to understand, if this patient is suffering from hypertension or, at risk, a severe risk of CVD, then we're going to be able to send them a specific heart monitor. And to Dr. Peters' point, they may have a reaction towards the actual resultant of that actual device. So more times than not, we're going to actually imprint specific biological imprints into a computer. So one of the things that we've done is we created a kind of a fingerprint counter or fingerprint like sensor. So all you have to do is just put it on the table, flat on the table, and hold your fingerprint there for 20 seconds. And we're going to be able to measure a number of different diagnostic areas for them. So we can be able to make it as simple as possible. So then that data can be communicated directly to while they're on the phone with an expert or PI or a CRA, while they be able to also understand, this is how we're going to help them walk through specific areas where when specific patients who need to be walked through handheld, we can be able to facilitate that, or those who are want full autonomy, right? We can make sure that we can create those types of environments where they can just look at the Apple model. We're going to look at it as an Apple model, make it as simple to follow instructions and follow through to the end, right? And we created those kind of devices or those types of environments for them to be able to follow through. So even in environments where we're 100 kilometers away from the nearest center or infrastructure, we created these types of tools or devices where it can actually hold that data for 7 days, right? So we can be able to then migrate into specific populaces, and then that data gets uploaded. So we've been able to kind of create and adapt to the way that the patients are, or where they are, specifically where they are. Because, you know, we could go to rural Utah, where there may not be as much of an infrastructure, or Monroe, Louisiana, to Dr. Gee's point about some of the area code 29203, you know, in Monroe, Louisiana, you have a median income of $39,000, right? There's only one clinical center in that area, right? And they're not even equipped to do clinical trials, right? So, and 64% of them are unemployed, right? And mainly of them, most of them are of African-American descent. So they are really just kind of blue collar workers, blue collar individuals that may not have seen advanced technologies, you know, at time of day. Maybe 1 in 30 people have maybe a smartphone, right? So those are the types of environments that we have to design for. So we've kind of been able to kind of create solutions, as well as being able to launch trials in those types of communities.
Yeah. Great. This has been such an informative discussion. We only have 4 minutes left. I did want to sort of ask the panel to, and any of you are welcome to answer this question. You know, there's a lot of data that can be collected with these digital health technologies. And we know that in the past, there have been historical abuses or concerns from, you know, underrepresented minoritized populations regarding data ownership. And Dr. Gee mentioned this, and sort of how those data will be used and whether they can be used in a way that is, you know, harmful to the participant in the clinical trial. And it sort of goes to the larger issues around trust. Do you have any thoughts on this topic about ways that we can address that proactively, prospectively, the issues around the amount of data that's being collected and how those data will be stored and who owns those data in a clinical trial setting? Just any of you, if you have any thoughts on that. Dr. Castillo.
Well, what I would say is that there's definitely, I would argue, lack of transparency. I think it largely depends on what is the device that you're using and what is the software that you're using. Because if you are the developer, if you're the app developer, or if you own the device and you're the one collecting the data, you can actually ensure or assure to the participants that there will be privacy and confidentiality in terms of where the data is going to land, who's going to see it, who's going to have access to it. But we also have, you know, consumer-based products that are being tested in for clinical trial use and that are being used for observational studies. And when you go through a third party, essentially as a user, you're signing off to that third party, but as a researcher, you have really no control over the privacy and confidentiality measures or whatever happens, you know, in the back end. So I think that is a huge challenge, because more and more there's interest in using these consumer-based products because they're widely used, they're accessible, they're cheaper than using, you know, the sensor, the I guess specifically developed sensors. And so the question becomes, can we partner with developers to maybe make those policies more transparent? Can we actually assure participants that their data is not going to be shared elsewhere? Actually, we can't as researchers because we are bound to the third party privacy policies. So I think this is definitely a huge issue, and I expect that a lot more discussion is going to happen as more and more of these products start being used not only in the research space, but also in the clinical space, because then, of course, the considerations are even more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the clinical trial setting, you know, we're getting consent to obtain, you know, all types of data from patients, you know, including biospecimen. And often patients will want to know, what is this going to be used for? Who's going to have access to it? Will I have access to it? And so I guess this will sort of dovetail into a question that's coming, I think, from the audience, which is there a risk of collecting too much data that then becomes really burdensome or not truly helpful in sort of the context in which you're collecting those data? And really, any of you can answer this question. Maybe I'll go to Dr. Gottlieb. Is there a risk of collecting too much data given the ease of collecting this data with digital health tools?
Well, I just wanted to come back to what Wendy said earlier. For us, privacy and proper data use and ethical concerns about what we collect and how we use it, that's really on top of everything we do. It just constantly follows us and precedes everything we do. And we also kind of have to look not only at North America or the United States, we also are influenced by the European privacy regulations. So if anything, we tend to be more conservative than many other users of data. And I just want to remind you, ChatGPT is now ingesting the correspondence of millions of users, and they make it quite clear that you don't own it, they own it, and they can do with it what they want. So I think what part of the problem is that we need to educate our patients or our customers and stakeholders what we can do and what we cannot do and what we won't do. And that's the transparency was also mentioned, and I think that's very important as well, education, because some of that is fears which may be more or less founded, and we have to kind of be clear about what we do with the data, and I think that will help the most, rather than just kind of tiptoeing around privacy regulations and make it more and more difficult. But I didn't address your question, could we have too much data? And I think, machine learning people will tell you there is no such thing as too much data, but I would say the more data, the better, and we can make better use of it. But obviously, the data quality is always a concern. Rather have good data than data of poor quality. And that's I think all I can say to that, because that's a difficult topic.
Great. I guess just to kind of conclude our session here, I just want to do a round robin on if you were consulted on sort of the optimal approach to determining, how and which kinds of digital health technology to use in a given trial, what would be the steps, the first 3 steps you would take to doing that feasibility assessment? And I will start with Dr. Swift.
All right, wonderful. And as far as the first 3 opportunities, I would say, I would look first and foremost for demographics, right? I need to look at demographic building, right, and understand their educational level. And then second, be able to then understand from a community, what are their resources? What's the focus of the resources? What can they actually obtain? What can they not do? What could do maybe with some help? And being able to then do journey mapping with each group and with each patient, and to be able to understand kind of, and goes into my third point, look at prevalence rates of specific conditions that are in these areas, because certain conditions will require a hybrid approach. Right, because you can't always do fully virtual diagnostics or even just care fully virtually. So these are the kind of adaptable things that I will look at initially.
That's great. Dr. Gee, I'm going to go to you. You gave us some really good points in your opening remarks, but I'm wondering if you could do your top 3. What do you think folks should do who want to use these digital health technologies in clinical trials? The top 3 things to do.
I think Dr. Swift took mine.
Okay, that's fine.
He hit it right on the head.
Okay, great. Dr. Peters?
I'd do 3 things. I'd first determine if it's relevant to the clinical population, because I want to help people. Secondly, I'd want to make sure that there was a way to teach and train the population on the device that I want to use, because if it's too hard, too complicated, or requires too many pieces, you can't use it. And then third, you actually have to provide follow-up to people who are wearing the device in an effective way, so that in case they have a problem, a question, or find something they don't know or understand, you've got to be there. So I think it's follow-up as well that's really important.
Great. Dr. Castillo?
Yes, I would have to echo that, definitely relevance. We've all been there. I think what Dr. Peters mentioned about support, we sometimes place the most efforts on enrollment and engagement, but the support throughout the trial is as important, because there are a lot of technical issues that can arise that participants may not be familiar with, and sometimes not even researchers. So providing that support And I would say the third thing is something that we haven't talked much about, but it's, so what happens after the clinical trial? So all these technologies improve, provide benefit, improve the patient experience, and the clinical trial ends, and then what happens? Do participants have access to these technologies? How are these technologies going to be accessed equitably? I think that would be the next follow-up question after all the top three items are addressed.
That is such a complicated one, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Dr. Gottlieb?
Yeah, so if I interpret the question as what would I prioritize in a digital health tool for a clinical trial, my priority would be on anything which makes the clinical trial smaller. And that's tightening the endpoint measurements. And that, the sample size gets reduced. That's an indirect way of tackling some of our enrollments, 3 questions, as opposed to just 1 question. And digital health tools can do that, potentially.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're a little bit over time here. I want to thank you all for really your insightful comments and sharing your perspectives with this group. I think what we learned here is to assume nothing, and that we really have to take the time to do our research in the populations that we want to reach with these clinical trials and with these digital health technologies, to really get to know the patient and the community from which the patient is coming from, and to really allow our patients to teach us about how we can best use these technologies. I think we also learned that these digital health technologies are not going to solve all of our problems, all of the infrastructural problems that we face, but that there are opportunities to leverage the available infrastructure, including what patients own themselves, to be able to customize to use these technologies in clinical trials. I want to thank all of you again, and to thank the Duke Margolis team for this session, and I'll turn it over to Dr. McClellan. Thank you.
Great, Lola. Again, a terrific panel, and really appreciate the perspectives that you all brought together. There's not necessarily any easy path forward, but the digital technologies really do seem to provide some opportunities with proper community engagement to reach more patients and learn more about medical products. So that last panel was terrific, but I want to thank all of our presenters, panelists, and moderators for contributing to a great set of discussions today, and also the very lively Q&A box, the questions, the comments added to the richness of the discussion. We were able to answer a lot of those during the sessions and in writing too. So we appreciate all of your contributions to making today as insightful as possible. We have covered a lot of material. Clearly, DHTs represent a new tool in the toolbox, and the use of DHTs, which is likely to continue to increase, carries many or all of the same correct considerations as every other management tool in the toolbox. It needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be practically usable. There are many issues to consider in addressing those kinds of questions, like statistical bias, confounding, validation, and so forth. But this is a pathway to potentially enable additional longitudinal data collection, more precise patient selection, and participation and follow-up, which represents a very promising opportunity for moving forward on expanding the reach and impact of clinical trials. Also, we heard, including in this last panel, that hearing from patients and their caregivers and family provides opportunities for DHT developers and sponsors and regulators to hear about what's most impactful in patients' lives and how DHT can support that, which would be really important in shaping our work to make clinical trials more impactful, representative, and useful for everyone. We did hear also that what's being measured using these technologies may be different than what's been captured in the clinical setting and some of our existing usual measures. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that we need to understand, and suggesting that we should keep an open mind about what the data is telling us and impacts what we should be aiming to learn in clinical trials. We've also heard collectively there's still a lot of uncertainty out there when using DHTs, and that means continued need for engaging a wide range of stakeholders like we've tried to do today. So there is some excitement here, but there's also apprehension that the new tools and measurements, if misused, could create some risks as well. We are seeing additional data to back up the use of DHTs. We're getting better at understanding what kind of data and validation would be needed. So that should help us move down this path constructively and hopefully see the continued development of a science-based field that leads to increased uptake of DHTs effectively to promote clinical trials for drug developments that really answer the questions that need to be answered. As stakeholders look to increase the use of DHTs in clinical trials for drug developments, it's also really important to ensure that these trials are diverse and accessible to all patient populations. Indeed, from what we've heard today, that should be an actual motivator for the use of DHTs and for engaging broader communities around DHTs in this formative phase of their use in clinical trials to get to more diverse reach of trials to all relevant potential participants. And that the importance of diversity and reach extends to the makeup of the clinical trial team. Drawing clinical trial team from the communities that they represent, as we've heard today, can help build trust, can help build engagement, can help get the right answers about how DHTs can be used effectively and with trust to improve clinical trial diversity and accessibility. We also heard from the very first presentations by Leonard Sachs and others about the importance of accessibility for digital health. Many of the same barriers that exist for traditional clinical trials can potentially extend to this space. Other important considerations need to be given to such areas as how to learn to use DHTs to make sure there's familiarity and ease of use in diverse populations. That means some supporting infrastructure like broadband and assistance in the uptake of devices that can support DHT implementation. So a lot of potential, a lot of promise, some notable progress, and still more work to be done. We hope you enjoyed the discussion today, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow for day 2, when we're going to dig deeper into some specific use cases that include many applications of actigraphy, as well as other sensor-based DHTs, which will give us a chance to take some of the concepts and issues we've discussed today and actually illustrate how they can be applied and are being applied in real world practice. So please join us tomorrow for that. And in the meantime, I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon, and thank you for your time with us today. Take care.